Hey everybody, how you doing tonight? Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad that all of you are here. We are going to have a great stream tonight. We're going to have a great conversation. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I'm so glad you're spending your Friday night with me. We are going to talk about a number of things, and it's going to be an interesting conversation here tonight. So welcome from the bottom of my heart, and let's jump right in.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, folks. Now, wanted to share a few things with you before we get started here. But, as you know, the way things work on here is that I give my opening remarks. And as I'm doing that, if anyone sends a super chat, I type it. I just write it down here on my list. And then we have the roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who's watching, who's on the other side of the camera. And then from there, when that's all over, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how the show works. It's a 3-part show. We're really just 2 parts with a roll call in the middle. But there you go. Recent protests in Peru. So that's how it works. If you have a super chat and you would like me to talk about it, by all means, just shoot me a super chat. That's how things work here. There you go. And I'll answer your super chat question in the second half of the show. Now, a little bit of a business announcement before we get too far into things. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a really important web conference called by the Schiller Institute. And those are friends of mine. I'm not a member of the Schiller Institute, but I respect them. They're good people. They've been supporting the Center for Political Innovation. They sent a speaker to our conference in Austin, Texas. Good folks. They're putting forward a lot of good material about why Russia is not our enemy and why we need to team up with China to build the One Belt, One Road initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union, and why Russia is not our enemy. And they're good folks. I'm going to be speaking at their web conference tomorrow. What's interesting is I won't be the only one speaking. A number of prominent individuals are speaking, including the Russian ambassador to the United States. In fact, one of the main speakers in the first plenary is going to be the Russian ambassador to the United States. So the Russian ambassador will be speaking early in the morning. I'm going to be on the third panel. So it's going to be quite an awesome event tomorrow. So if you can tune into that, I always learn so much when I go to a Schiller Institute event, full of facts, full of data, full of information. Again, I don't agree with the overall view of the Schiller Institute on a lot of things. We're coming at things from like a Marxist, leftist, dialectical, and historical materialist perspective. But at the same time, they are full of information and they're clearly on the right side when it comes to struggling for peace and economic development. And I agree with their basic vision for humanity. Tune in. It's going to be a great web conference tomorrow. That's how we roll. I just wanted to get that out of the way. If you're going to be able to watch tomorrow, please do. Please do. How do I get one of those stylish Russian state-affiliated media tags on my Twitter? They're handing them out everywhere. Aw, you're making me feel good, Christian. How do I get a Russian state-affiliated media tag? We'll definitely talk about that. But tonight, folks, I wanted to do my opening remarks tonight, and I'll be writing your super chats down. We'll answer them in the second half of the show. I want to be clear now, this is not a news broadcast, right? I am a news reporter, and when I am on RT, I report the news. If you want to watch news, go and watch RT right now. Then there's a lot of great alternative media that's focused on news, right? Sputnik Radio, they do news. Mint Press, they do news. What's this, Caleb? I like you, but do you think my Latin family is bigoted and worthy of marginal? No, come on, man. All right. We're not really a news outlet. This is more of an analysis outlet, right? This is an analysis outlet, right? We are analyzing world events. We are putting world events in context. We are coming to understand things that are happening in the world. And we're talking about background, we're talking about ideology, economics, history. This is more about processing and understanding the news than it is news, right? News is just straight reporting. This happened here, this happened there. But watch Convo Couch for news. They do great stuff. Fiorella and Pasta, they're doing great stuff. But what we're doing here is a little bit more analytical. And sometimes when you do analysis, you have to go down a rabbit hole because nothing is ever as simple as it seems. There are so many things in this world that are much more complicated than they appear. And sometimes you have to be a bit of a nerd. You have to be a bit of a book nerd, a researcher, to get to the bottom of what's actually going on, because it's not something that appears, to meet the eye. It's not something that is right there on the surface. You have to dig into these things. So tonight, we're going to have a conversation that relates to a number of things that are going on right now. It relates to what's going on with the Supreme Court. It relates to the hysterical propaganda against Russia. It relates to my war with BreadTube and BreadTube's war against me. It relates to a lot of different things, but it's really a rabbit hole. We are going to delve very, very deep into some obscure stuff. And that's okay, because we want to know the truth. We want to know what's really going on. And in order to do that, you have to dig, right? If you want to know what the truth is, sometimes you have to be willing to get your hands dirty and you have to go into things that are a bit complicated. So we're going to do that on here, and you all can handle that because that's why you're here. If you wanted me to just give you surface level analysis, so-and-so is good, so-and-so is bad, I don't like the look of so-and-so's face, you'd be somewhere else. You're looking to go deeper into these things. So I'm gonna go deeper into things tonight. We're gonna get a little bit deeper into things. So the United States is a dying empire. All right, and I've said that many times. The United States is a dying empire. And one of the recurring themes on these broadcasts has been comparing the decline of U.S. imperialism with the fall of the Roman Empire. It's been a very consistent theme on these broadcasts. We've made a lot of that. I have a lecture, like a class I gave, Is America the New Rome and Will It Fall? I've done stuff on all kinds of angles. We've talked about the fall of Rome, etc. And one aspect of Rome and the Roman Empire was what you could call some people call them the Roman mysteries, the Roman mystery religions. Some people call them the Roman mystery cults. And it was an aspect of Roman society that largely played a role in the fall of the Roman Empire. And it was this, that Rome was a huge empire. And in order to maintain its domination of the world, in order to keep plundering countries, forcing them to give tribute, forcing them to give slaves, they had to maintain a huge military, a huge navy, a huge infantry. They had special divisions in that military. And that they were a polytheistic society. They did not believe in one god. They believed in many gods. And they had their official gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus. But they were constantly importing different gods into Rome. And there were a lot of different religious practices within Roman society. And these religious practices often were specific to important people in the empire. For example, Neptune was the god of the ocean, And if you were in the Roman Navy, you joined the cult of Neptune. All right. And this was common. If you were a sailor, you were part of the Navy in Rome, you would pray at the temple to the god Neptune. And there would be special rituals that only you and other sailors knew about that would honor the god Neptune. And there were special moral principles that you believed in that were specific to worshiping the god of the ocean, the god Neptune, because you were a sailor, because you were on the ocean, because you were involved in traveling around by ship. You had a specific religious belief and a specific religious practice, and it was often very secret. Only other sailors got to learn the specific beliefs of the cult of Neptune, and you'd learn it little bit by little bit, right? At first, they would teach you a little bit. After you've been a sailor for 2 or 3 years, you'd learn more. After you'd been a sailor for 10 years, you'd learn more. And that this was how the Roman Empire worked. For the sailors, they had their own specific mystery religion about, worshiping the god of the ocean, and their own moral code and their own practices and their own rules that they had to follow, and they held each other accountable. And the same went for special divisions of the military. They had what they called military orders. And these military orders, again, they had their own gods, they had their own religious practices, and they had very secret beliefs that were only available to certain members of the group. And that this is kind of how Rome functioned. They couldn't have one religion for everybody. In order to function, they had specific religions for specific sections of the state, for the military orders, etc. And on top of that, they were constantly bringing in different religions from around the empire. They talk about the cult of Mithras. Mithras was a god worshipped by the ancient Persians. The cult of Mithras was imported into Rome. The cult of Isis from Egypt was imported into Rome, and there were special ceremonies around Isis. And you had various religious practices that were imported, and you had various philosophers, Seneca and others, were brought into Rome. And that the Romans officially, they did have their official polytheistic religion, but they were constantly setting up specific religions for specific people. And this was a pretty interesting aspect of Roman society. And as Roman society started coming apart, part of the reason they eventually adopted Christianity was because they were trying to hold the country together. Because they didn't, not the country, the empire together, the state, the government, they were trying to hold it together because they didn't all believe the same things. Part of the reason Constantine converted to Christianity was because the idea was if they could all only believe in one God and only believe in one Messiah, Jesus, that was a way to hold the empire together. That was one of the arguments for converting to Christianity. But it didn't work, right? Rome fell shortly after the conversion to Christianity. So it didn't really work, but that was part of the issue that Rome had, was that within the government apparatus, people believed different things. These beliefs were often esoteric and hidden from the public. And there were factions in the state that were fighting against each other that had very, very specific beliefs. And these specific beliefs were not available to the public, and they served a purpose, right? Having those sailors worship Poseidon and have a code of ethics only for sailors and have an esoteric religious beliefs and practices that were only for sailors. This was something that really worked for a while, but pretty soon it resulted in Rome coming apart. And that these mystery cults, the mysteries of Rome, the mystery cults, mystery religions, whatever you want to call them, they eventually laid the basis for the crafts and the guilds, right? The blacksmiths and the bricklayers, and when people talk about masonry, the rites of Freemasonry, when people talk about alchemy, right? That as Europe, came out of the Roman Empire, a lot of the specific skilled trades, like blacksmiths, like pipe fitters, like bricklayers, like alchemists or whatever, they had kind of functioned in the same way. They had their own beliefs, their own code of ethics. That was how they were set up. And this was a big deal. It was a very big deal. And I have written a lot about how Christianity originated in Rome as kind of the mystery cult of the proletariat. And this is what Karl Kautsky argues in his book, The Foundations of Christianity. As he argues that essentially, in Rome was the first society where you had people that were neither slaves nor masters. They were neither landowners nor slaves. They were proletarians, people with nothing to sell but their labor power. And that among proletarians in Rome, you started having the secret worship of Jesus the carpenter. And as the proletarians were going on strike and asserting their own economic interests, they were forming their own mystery religion, just like the sailors had their religion, just like the military orders had their religion. That the proletarians of Rome, because that was how you organized in Roman society, they essentially started, organizing as Christians, and Christianity originated as the religion of the proletariat asserting itself. And I talk about that in the book that Keaton Mansfield and myself we put together in the essay I wrote in here, where I quote from Karl Kautsky, I quote from Elaine Pagels and others. I talk about how Christianity originated in Rome and kind of spread as the religion of the proletariat in the city of Rome, asserting their rights in Roman society. But that's not what I'm talking about tonight. I want to talk about what's going on in the United States right now, because as we are all very aware, there is a fight in the ruling class. There's a big fight going on among the ruling class of the United States. At this point, the billionaires and the bankers that run the United States are fighting amongst themselves. The military is fighting amongst itself. The intelligence agencies are fighting among themselves. And there is a division in the ruling class. And this is what happens. This is what happens when there are capitalist crises, when the economy is failing to function in the old way, when there is instability. And I talked about that on last night's stream. When you have a prolonged crisis of overproduction, when you have mass hunger in society, when you have all kinds of people hungry because there's too much food, when you have all kinds of people homeless because there's too much housing, the irrationality of capitalism, poverty created by abundance, when you have a long-term economic crisis, that's what you begin to have in society. You have the capitalists begin fighting with each other, scrambling to try and suppress one faction of the ruling class, scrambling to fight another. That's where you get the rise of fascism. That's where you get the rise of Bonapartism, military coups, etc. This is what happens when capitalism is in a state of breakdown and decay. You talk about Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a Bonapartist, a progressive Bonapartist in American history. And he took a lot of measures to stabilize U.S. society. He created unemployment insurance, and he created the Works Progress Administration, built infrastructure. And there was an attempt to overthrow him. There was an attempted military coup against him. The business plot of 1934, where a bunch of Wall Street bankers and billionaires like Henry Morgan and Henry Ford, they conspired to send the military to remove him from office. And that there was clearly a fight in the ruling class. And when there's a fight in the ruling class, that creates an opening for the people, right? And that fight in the ruling class between Roosevelt and the Rockefellers and his allies, and Henry Morgan and Henry Ford and the National Association of Manufacturers and their allies, that fight created an opening for the labor movement and the Communist Party. And they were able to make an alliance, a popular front, an alliance with Roosevelt. And that enabled the labor movement to expand. And that ultimately enabled the United States to align with the Soviet Union in World War II and defeat the Nazis and be part of the democratic coalition against fascism. So these divisions in the ruling class are not irrelevant, and they're not just stupid conspiracy theories. They're actually quite important. Paying attention to what capitalist is on what side and what capitalist is on the other side, and fighting with all of them, right? Of course, we all like to say all the capitalists are on the same team, right? Right. At the end of the day, Tweedledee versus Tweedledum. The capitalists always win. The ruling class always comes out. The workers always lose. That's surface level analysis. That's true. Right. And then when you're first getting people to understand that the problem is capitalism, it's not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, you want to point that out, that the ruling class are all, they're all on the same page, and that there's no real way to vote for the working class in the elections, etc. However, when you get beyond that, when you're thinking strategically about how working people in the United States can assert their interests and how U.S. imperialism can be brought down, when you're thinking strategically that way about building a new society in the United States and asserting, the working class and the needs of the people around the world and their struggle against the domination by big corporations and banks in the United States, when you're thinking about that, that makes studying the actual divisions in the ruling class very important, because there may come a time, like there was in the 1930s, where it would be necessary to align with Roosevelt, or like during the U.S. Civil War, where it was necessary for Marxists and the labor movement to align with Abraham Lincoln against the Southern slaveholders. Or, there might be a situation like there was in the 1970s, where you had Richard Nixon coming into office as kind of a Bonapartist and fighting his own class, trying to stabilize things in order to repress the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement. You have to know what's going on. And if you just say, oh, they're all together, they're all in it together, well, during, quote unquote, good times, when the economy is very stable, they are all together, right? In the 90s, they were all together. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan said, we're all friends after 6 o'clock. That's what he said when speaking to Congress. He said, we're all friends after 6 o'clock, meaning that the Democrats and the Republicans are not all, they're all friends after 6 o'clock. They all go and drink in the same bars. They all know each other's families, and they don't care. And that's how it is in good times. But that's not how it is now. We saw what happened on January 6th. They are not all friends after 6 o'clock. There are people in the ruling class that want to kill people in the other faction of the ruling class. There are big divisions among the powerful in the United States, and there are big divisions among the state apparatus. And at the end of the day, this is what is very, very important to understand. At the end of the day, the elected government doesn't really have the power. The power ultimately lies in the hands of those who control the guns. Right? That's what Mao Zedong said in the Little Red Book, and that's what he meant. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, meaning that the military, the people with the guns, and the intelligence agencies, the CIA and the FBI, at the end of the day, those are the people that really have the power. The elected government is able to pass legislation, and in theory, the elected government is supposed to be accountable to those people. But at the end of the day, the U.S. economy is centered around a military-industrial complex. At the end of the day, the president depends on the Secret Service to protect him and the FBI to protect him. And it's very clear at the end of the day that the state apparatus, as Lenin talks about in his important book, the State and Revolution, the state apparatus, those who control the guns, are really the ones who have the power. And there's many examples of that. One example I often like to point to is Leonard Peltier, right? Leonard Peltier is a Native American activist who was charged for killing FBI agents, right? There was a shootout between Native American activists in the 1970s. Leonard Peltier was sent to federal prison, and they said he'd killed 2 FBI agents. Well, he didn't kill them. If you look at the data, it's pretty clear that it was friendly fire. The FBI agents shot each other. It was friendly fire that killed the agents. He didn't kill any FBI agents. Doesn't matter. He's still in prison for the rest of his life. And it looked like in 1999, or I believe it was the year 2000. In the year 2000, when Bill Clinton was going to leave office, Bill Clinton looked like he was going to free Leonard Peltier. It really looked, like Leonard Peltier was going to be freed. Was going to be freed by Bill Clinton. And George Soros, it appears, wanted Leonard Peltier to be free, which is fine. I mean, just because George Soros wants something doesn't mean it's bad, right? I think freeing Leonard Peltier would be a good thing. But then the FBI basically threatened Bill Clinton. FBI Director Louis Frey, he gathered all of his agents, and hundreds of agents marched outside the White House demanding that Bill Clinton not free Leonard Peltier. You can read about this. This was public knowledge. The New York Times reported on this. The FBI basically threatened Bill Clinton and said, no way in hell are you going to free Leonard Peltier. And Bill Clinton backed down. And Leonard Peltier is still in prison, even though he's innocent. Right? These kinds of incidents show that the state apparatus, the military, the policing agencies, they're the ones that really have the power at the end of the day. And, you look at the history of the CIA and the role they play in handling the media, and how they basically, with Project Mockingbird and all of that, and especially nowadays with Silicon Valley and et cetera, that the real power is in the hands of those who have the guns, which is the military and the intelligence agencies. All right. Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy, established by the Biden administration. Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. So when I compare the United States to ancient Rome, I compare the United States to ancient Rome because when I talk about the mystery cults, the mystery religions, we have the same thing here. What the people in the Pentagon believe, and what the people in the FBI believe, and what the people in the NSA believe, and what the people in the CIA believe is very, very important. It's very important to know what those people believe because at the end of the day, that's what's going to influence policy, and we often know we know a lot about the president, we know a lot about the vice president, the first lady. We often don't really know what the people in the deep state. Yeah, I said deep state. That proves I'm an evil Trump white supremacist, right? I said deep state. You got me. You got me, bread tube. I said deep state. Oh my God, I'm canceled. But anyway, you know, what the people in the deep state apparatus believe is very important, but often what they believe is rather esoteric. It's rather esoteric. It's not something that average Americans believe because average Americans aren't in the FBI. Average Americans are not in the NSA. Average Americans are not in the Pentagon brass. Average Americans might be in the lower levels of the military. They might be infantrymen or privates or whatever. But the Pentagon brass, the people who went to West Point, what they believe is very, very different, right? And that we have the same kind of situation where within the deep state, within the state apparatus of the United States, to use Leninist terminology, we have mystery religions, mystery cults that operate and are very key in setting policy. And I've done a lot of exposés of these people. For example, I recently did an expose video about a guy, this pastor who runs Church on the Hill, Patrick Mahoney. We can call him Looney Mahoney. He's a nut. He's a crazed anti-China extremist, right? And I did a whole video exposing him. I've written articles about him. Patrick Mahoney of Church on the Hill is an anti-abortion activist. He goes to China. He's obsessively hating China. He was protesting the movie Mulan. Oh my God, you can't have a movie where there's a Chinese woman who's a star. He's obsessively opposed to abortion. And he has a position. He runs Church on the Hill. He's giving religious guidance to members of Congress, and he's basically lobbying them to work against the Chinese Communist Party. All right. Nasara Gasara. All right. And he's basically lobbying them to work against the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. And he's a fanatic. You watch him; he's just an unhinged, lunatic. But he has access to members of Congress. People wouldn't vote for Patrick Mahoney, this guy who's like obsessed with hating China and obsessed with outlawing abortion, is screaming, "We take sides." He's a nut. People wouldn't vote for him, and so they don't. They vote for somebody who seems normal, and then Patrick Mahoney whispers in their ear and pushes his extremist beliefs down their throat, and that's how these things work, right? And so when we start talking about the beliefs of the people at the top of U.S. society and how they're different than the beliefs of average Americans, this gets very important. And this points to a similarity between U.S. society and ancient Rome. And, QAnon, for example. QAnon is a big thing, right? The belief that there is a secret pedophile conspiracy at the top of the government. There are Satan-worshipping pedophiles at the top of the U.S. government. I don't believe that. I do think Jeffrey Epstein was certainly a real person, and that what he did was certainly nefarious, and there's not enough investigation and exposés about what Jeffrey Epstein did. But as far as the idea that, QAnon, whatever, that's not where my beliefs are. But it points to the fact that among the U.S. public, there is an understanding that among the elite and among the deep state, there are beliefs that are contrary to the beliefs of average Americans. And that controlling people at the top of the U.S. society, controlling them, controlling what they think, and regulating what they believe is very, very important to manipulating U.S. society. For example, there's many examples of this I can give. One great example is Mormonism. The top religion among FBI and CIA is Mormonism. Now, Mormonism is a bit of an obscure religion in the United States. Not really obscure. I mean, if you go out west, you go to Oregon, you go to Washington State, you go to Utah, especially Utah. If you go to Idaho, it's pretty widespread. But I mean, it's this obscure religious group in the United States. It started out as kind of a utopian, messianic utopian socialist kind of group started by this guy named Joseph Smith, who was really into having multiple wives, and they had multiple wives and whatever. But then they moved out to Utah, and they basically had their own country out there, and they didn't recognize the U.S. government. And eventually, the U.S. government sent federal troops out there and invaded Utah. There was like armed battles, and they were forced to give up polygamy and having more than one wife, and they were accepted in the United States, and they were always treated with suspicion. They were always treated like they were not a they were kind of a fringe extreme element in US society. But then starting in the 1950s, they went all in with anti-communism. They embraced McCarthyism. They were big anti-communists, proving themselves to the FBI and CIA about how anti-communist they were. And then J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, didn't trust them, but he died. And starting in the 1970s, the Mormons suddenly started expanding, right? Because they started doing all this overseas missionary work. And they were doing intelligence for the US government. They were basically doing CIA work for free. They were gathering information and feeding it back to the CIA. And so because of that, they became trusted. And starting in the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden, the FBI and CIA became full of Mormons. And they were good recruits. They don't drink alcohol. They're very disciplined. They tend to follow orders well. They have kind of an authoritarian culture about them. And so Mormonism is kind of a mystery cult in the leadership. It's got religious beliefs that are very esoteric. It's got religious beliefs that are quite far from what most Christians in the United States believe. There's this second book called the Book of Mormon that was written on golden plates, that was handed to Joseph Smith by an angel. And, the Garden of Eden was actually in Kansas City, Missouri, or something like that. And it's a pretty bizarre religion, right? And that Jesus came to the United States, and Native Americans are actually Jews, and all kinds of beliefs that are pretty wild. But they don't want you to know about them, right? If the Mormons ever knock on your door, they're not going to talk about that stuff with you, right? A cold civil war in the ruling class. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I think I knocked my mic off. Settings. Can you hear me now? Yes, you can. Very good. All right. But, they're not going to, cold civil war. They're not going to talk to you about these things because it's kind of like the ancient Roman mysteries, and it's kind of like Masonry, or it's kind of like it's the kind of esoteric beliefs that are only for those that they trust, right? And that's kind of how these things work. Mormonism is a very important mystery cult in the United States, has a lot of influence among FBI and CIA. And, Mitt Romney, who's a U.S. senator, was the Republican nominee for president. That's a big deal. Now, there's other influential groups. For a long time, the Church of Scientology had a lot of influence in Hollywood. And you'll notice that there's been a big campaign to clear the Church of Scientology out of Hollywood. And again, this is one of those esoteric religious groups. What they believe is not very clear. You have to be in it for a little while before they bring you in. And then you gradually learn their beliefs, and that they had a lot of power, and they could kill a movie in Hollywood if they didn't agree with it. And they had a lot of power, right? There's a lot of this going on. A lot of this. And this all relates to a number of things that are going on right now, because it's very apparent that there is a faction in the Pentagon that does not agree with escalating with Russia. And that's very apparent. And that's been apparent for a long time. And they obviously are not a declared entity, because that would be like treason. That would be a violation of military discipline. But there's a number of examples of this. The most recent example is that the Pentagon will not confirm some of the allegations that Biden is making against Russia. Biden is accusing Russia of committing horrendous massacres. And the Pentagon says, we can't confirm that. We don't know where Biden's getting that. Now, that's huge. The Pentagon is basically saying, don't trust the president. of the United States when it comes to allegations he's making about Russia. There's this Bucha massacre. Russia says this isn't what happened. They want to have a UN meeting to prove this isn't what happened. The USA won't have the UN meeting. The White House insists, yes, Russia committed this horrendous massacre. And the Pentagon has come forward and said they agree that Russia may not have done this. They can't confirm. They haven't said they agree. They've said that they cannot confirm that Russia committed this horrendous massacre, which is huge. They're not willing to back up the president of the United States. There are differences within the deep state, right? And that Tulsi Gabbard, she was active duty U.S. military. Lieutenant Colonel Tulsi Gabbard came out and was speaking in support of the Syrian government and against the hysteria against Russia. You had Michael Flynn, who was the national security advisor to Donald Trump, a big Pentagon guy, who was basically removed because of the fact that that he was widely perceived as being sympathetic to Russia. And, there is a layer of people in the Pentagon. They're not communists. They're not socialists. They're not anti-imperialists by any stretch whatsoever. These guys are right-wing as hell. But they really hate Al-Qaeda, and they really hate ISIS and Islamic terrorist groups. And Russia has really impressed these guys because Russia keeps track of those terrorists like crazy. It monitors Russia. There is no country in the world that is not a Muslim country that has more Muslims than Russia does. So Russia is constantly worried. They have been fighting in Chechnya. There was an Islamist insurgency funded by Saudi Arabia against the Russian government for a long time. All right, David Harvey and Slava Zizek. Russia, they have been monitoring Islamic terrorist Wahhabi groups for a really, really long time. So they can really, and they share intelligence with the United States. And a lot of the Pentagon guys think, wow, if we want to fight Al-Qaeda, if we want to fight ISIS, these Russians are great people to do it because they've been fighting them longer than we have. And the Russians, they're very good at intelligence and they're very good at, at military stuff. Their military is quite amazing, as the world is kind of watching right now in Ukraine. So there's guys in the Pentagon who, for their own reasons, they hate Al-Qaeda, they hate ISIS, they want to protect American lives from terrorism. And they say, Russia, we shouldn't be fighting with them. And they don't think Russia's so bad. And when Obama was thinking about sending cruise missiles to Syria in 2013, all of a sudden, these images surfaced across the internet of U.S. soldiers holding up, images over their face, basically denouncing what Obama was doing. Now, of course, the Pentagon could find out. It's not hard with computers to trace, who's sending these pictures. But it was very clear. It was made apparent to Obama that there was a faction within the Pentagon brass who didn't want Obama to bomb Syria back in 2013. And Tulsi Gabbard speaks for more than herself. There's a lot of people in the Pentagon who think like Tulsi Gabbard. And now we have the Pentagon coming forward and saying that they won't confirm the Bucha massacre allegations that are being made by the Biden administration. This is all very, very big. So there's disagreements within the state apparatus. And that leads me to something that we have talked about here. And this is where we're getting down a rabbit hole. There are continuing investigations now into the January 6th, uprising, protest, storming of the Capitol, mass vandalism and trespassing by Trump supporters. They're continuing to investigate it. And one of the people that they are now investigating is Ginny Thomas. Virginia Thomas is her name. She's the wife of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas, the first African-American Supreme Court justice, was widely accused of sexual harassment at the time that he was, that he was being sworn in and being, approved as a Supreme Court judge. He was accused of sexual harassment. Joe Biden was vicious to his accuser, because Joe Biden, if anyone knows about sexual harassment and sexual assault, it's Joe Biden. Ask Tara Reid about that. So even though Joe Biden was a Democrat and Clarence Thomas was largely considered to be a Republican, a conservative judge, Joe Biden just went vicious after the woman who accused Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment, Anita Hill. And now Clarence Thomas is on the Supreme Court. Well, now it turns out Clarence Thomas's wife, Virginia Thomas, people are saying that she was a big supporter of Donald Trump, big supporter of Trump, and that she was texting people in the Trump administration, that she believed the election was rigged against Donald Trump. She was saying things that people say identify her with QAnon. And so now we're getting into the beliefs of Ginny Thomas. And that leads us to some very, very interesting revelations, right? It would make sense, right? It's like, okay, Clarence Thomas is a Republican, Republican appointed judge, conservative. His wife, why wouldn't she be a Trump supporter, right? Oh, no. That is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. And again, we are getting into some obscure stuff here. And that's okay, because you all are here for that. You all love this. You all love this. I know you love this. I know you do. And you know you do too. That's why we're here, for the obscure details of these events. Ginny Thomas is apparently a former member of two organizations. The first being a self-help cult, therapy cult called LifeSpring. And the second being the Cult Awareness Network, directed by Steve Hassan. I kid you not. Ginny Thomas used to be a member of a fanatical religious cult called LifeSpring. And then she was a very active member of Steve Hassan's Cult Awareness Network. Now, who is Steve Hassan? Well, if you read my book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism, you'll know who Steve Hassan is. Steve Hassan is basically, from the good information I was handed, he is someone who has been advising BreadTube in how to make their videos. He's been, apparently, according to a source that I will not name, he's been on the phone with ContraPoints. He's been on the phone. I didn't hear that he's been on the phone with Vosh, but he has been on the phone with ContraPoints, from what I was told, again, according to this source. And this isn't a complete secret. And in fact, Steve Hassan, he did a show. He did an appearance with Caleb Maupin. Steve Hassan is the cult expert of American media. He's the founder. He was a member for a long time of something called the Cult Awareness Network. And he is mainstream U.S. media's favorite cult expert, basically. Whenever they're talking about cults on American television, they bring on Steve Hassan. And Steve Hassan is advising BreadTube and how to do what they're doing and how to deprogram people from the alt-right. And it seems that Steve Hassan, the cult leader, he has a little bit of an agenda. Now, he appeared on the BreadTube channel, Faraday Speaks, which is run by Caleb Maupin. It's a minor BreadTube channel. This is what he said. This is Steve Hassan talking with a BreadTuber. This is the leading cult expert in the United States talking. I talk. All right, very good. Head of Russian. This is Steve Hassan talking with Caleb Maupin of Faraday Speaks. This is what he says. He's supposed to be advising him on deprogramming and becoming an ex-right-winger. This is Steve Hassan, advisor to BreadTube, leading cult expert in the United States, speaking to a BreadTuber.
Conspiracy theories like Alex Jones. So in my last book, I write about Russian propaganda and Putin and what's called fourth generation warfare, which is the PSYOPs program. And so was Molyneux consciously recruited into this thing, or did he just see an opportunity where he could make a lot of money? I don't know.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah, Stefan Molyneux, the libertarian, is part of a Russian conspiracy. I mean, this is classic. This is like nutty.
But it's not a force for democracy and freedom and critical thinking. It's the dark side of the influence continuum, the destructive mind control side. Caleb, I'd like for my listeners, if you could just introduce yourself before we go.
Yeah, so Steve Hassan basically, suddenly a big theme in his anti-cult worship, his anti-cult exercises, a big theme in his research is this idea that Russia is responsible for all things bad, right? And Steve Hassan has now come out and talked about the fact that he's been working with Ginny Thomas, the wife of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. He's worked with her for years. He's a friend of the wife of a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. And this is the guy advising BreadTube. And this is his recent appearance on MSNBC.
Is in the news a lot, including for things that most justices don't want to be in the news for. That includes this Ginny Thomas scandal and calls for her husband, Justice Clarence Thomas, to recuse from any January 6 cases because of her conduct. There are texts between her and Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, when they were in office in the White House, that shows efforts essentially to support overturning the 2020 election. Thomas also appeared to invoke conspiracy theories and lies that have been widely debunked, including the QAnon idea that basically the left was committing a heist in the fact that Joe Biden won and that the Biden crime family, quote, will be living in barges off Gitmo to face military tribunals for sedition and asking Meadows, make a plan, release the crack and save us from the left. So Ginny Thomas is now in the news because of her own conduct. It may relate to her husband, but it's her words and deeds and what she did relating to the election. And all of this has renewed scrutiny on these two very powerful people, and specifically Ginny's history, including her direct involvement, something she doesn't deny, with what many have called a cult. Indeed, there's a newly released video from back in 1986 that shows her discussing her struggle after leaving that cult. The video was shared by Dr. Stephen Hassan. He's a mental health professional. He's an expert on cults. He works to get people out of them, which is what she did. He knew Ginny Thomas in 1986, and he's here to discuss all of this in the wider context of our culture of political extremism. I'll mention that the New Yorker has also reported on this in prior coverage before this latest scandal, noting that Ginny Thomas flunked the bar exam and fell in with what they called a, quote, cultish self-help group, LifeSpring, whose members were encouraged to strip naked and mock each other's body fat. Now, whatever one thinks of that reporting and that group, Thomas did break out of it a very long time ago. She even became a public advocate and critic of these cults, speaking out in what she says was an effort to help other people avoid this risk, this fate. As we learn about all of this and its connection to potentially some of what we're going through today, not only in her life, but as a nation, we're joined by Dr. Stephen Hassan himself. He has over 40 years experience in this area, including what he calls the undue influence tactics and tax, basically, that are used by these cults or authoritarian leaders. And I should mention, he has a book out that does close the circle on the politics of some of this called The Cult of Trump. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ari.
Now, before we go on here, I just want to mention Steve Hassan's book, The Cult of Trump, is one of the stupidest books I've ever read. All right. Steve Hassan has this whole definition of what a cult is. A cult is a group that it controls your behavior, it controls your emotions, it controls your information take. Donald Trump doesn't do any of that. Donald Trump is a demagogic politician, right? QAnon doesn't do any of that. Nobody in QAnon is told what newspapers, what they're allowed to read, not told how they're allowed to feel, what they're allowed to think. He has this whole bite model, and it doesn't apply to Donald Trump, and it doesn't apply to QAnon. Right? QAnon is a crazy internet conspiracy theory. And Donald Trump is a demagogic politician with fanatical supporters. But by his own definition, they are not a cult. And he says really crazy stuff in the book. He claims that Donald Trump is using hypnosis techniques in his speeches. I kid you not. But Donald Trump, while he's speaking, he's like hypnotizing his audience, and he's like, hypnotizing them or something. It's really a crazy book. It's a nutty book. But it all gets back to Russia. Russiagate is the center of it. That's a big thing, right? It's all about the evil Russians are directing the evil cult of Donald Trump. This guy's advising BreadTube, but let's continue.
Absolutely. You've worked in this field, and I went out of my way to be very clear about what happens and what we know and don't know, because the fact that somebody got caught up in this is not a rejection of everything they ever otherwise do in life. Indeed, let's begin there, because you've called attention to this and how she spoke out. So we have a little bit of this video that's you're the source, just to tell viewers, of her speaking out after the break. Take a look.
when you come away from a cult, you have to find a balance in your life as far as getting involved with fighting the cult or exposing it. What was it that made you get into that group, and what open questions are there that still need to be answered? I'm struggling with the balance between that. I still have so many questions. So all those things that got me to LifeSpring are still there.
That clip, by the way, folks, is very important. Listen to that. She's struggling with how much time she should spend fighting against the cult. Very interesting. Very interesting.
So let's start there. How did you come to meet her, and how did she strike you at that time?
I was an activist for 10 years at the point of that meeting, which was a focused support group meeting. I was a national coordinator of that for a time. Essentially, I had warm feelings towards her. For years, she was involved in cult awareness briefings. I was invited in 1988 to do one of these congressional briefings. We were trying to do an anniversary of Jonestown, actually, and make Cult Awareness Week, because Congressman Leo Ryan was assassinated at the orders of Jim Jones, and so many people and children died unnecessarily. And so she was wonderful. She introduced me to Clarence Thomas in 1992. I shook his hand. And that's the last time I...
Isn't he important? He's so important. He shook hands with a Supreme Court justice. It's just got to get that out there. You know, he's on TV. It's really important for everyone to know Steve Hassan shook hands with a Supreme Court justice, even though he's doing like a hit piece on that Supreme Court justice and his wife. You know, we just got to get it out there. He did actually meet a Supreme Court justice. Look how important Steve is. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be going there. This guy annoys me, but continue.
Remember interacting with her.
Did she, at that time, did she strike you as fully out or over that experience and thus sort of back to whatever baseline that might be? Or did she strike you as still processing it or caught up in some of it?
Oh, I think she evolved dramatically from 1986 to 1992. You know, I don't know what caused her to go down the QAnon rabbit hole, but I can say that there are some very bad actors who want to undermine America and democracy and human rights and women's rights to choose. And you know, people are telling me that Trump was controlling Ginny Thomas. I don't think so. I think somebody else was kind of giving her the ideas, and she was going to Trump and telling him who to fire and who to hire and other things like that.
And I mentioned the New Yorker's reporting. That article states that at one point, Donald Trump, according to the New Yorker, said that he thought she was too far out for him. People could take that for what it is. A separate article has a similar theme, and they said, quote, the lists that she was pushing were, quote, so insane and unworkable, a lot of them were dripping with paranoia and read like they were written by a disturbed person. So that's inner circle Trump criticism. That's where I'm curious, given your knowledge, whether you see this as a coincidence, someone who had this long ago history goes on to get involved in politics, or do you see any linkage here, like you explore in your book, the idea that some of the allure of certain organizations, lies, conspiracies, ways to explain the world overlap into some people's chosen politics?
Yeah, so how I see it is she was involved with this large group awareness training that did a lot of hypnotic techniques and behavior modification techniques aimed at breaking people's egos down. She described one exercise where the members were told to strip naked down to panties and bikinis, and then were body shamed about it. They did a lot of things like that. Confront your fear. Somebody was afraid of drowning, and he jumped into a moving river and drowned because he didn't know how to swim, and they got sued heavily.
There are politicians who talk about issues that are hot button for QAnon, who, based on their record and background, we have evidence to believe that they know they're trafficking in lies and they're doing it for a political reason. Shocker, not the first time that's ever happened in politics. It seems something different if Miss Thomas or Justice Thomas actually believe some of this stuff. Do you think there's an overlap of this, or is that too far because someone else could push back and say, hey, Ari, a lot of people believe in horoscopes. A lot of people believe in all kinds of stuff.
No,
Actually, yes, a lot of people in the U.S. government believe in all kinds of stuff, and that's kind of why this is important. And that's what I'm getting to here, because there's something very, very sinister beneath the surface here that's not being acknowledged. Steve Hassan is going on and on about his connections with people in the government, but there's some information that I'm going to give you all pretty soon that is going to make this all a little bit disturbing.
I actually have done a deep dive researching QAnon and its religious underpinnings, and I see it as a cult and a psychological warfare operation.
You do? You see QAnon as a kind of a virtual cult, even if they don't all meet up?
Exactly. That's what the age we're living in is. People can be radicalized online. I learned this when I was studying ISIS recruitment online.
I wonder, is he just doing that for his own fun? Are there just a lot of American ISIS recruits? Would he might be doing research for some kind of agency that might be trying to track security threats to the United States?
Screens are very powerful, and they, especially with the pandemic, people get even more susceptible. But I want to be clear, I definitely have the impression she's a true believer when she was sending those texts, and that's why I surmise that she's been indoctrinated and somebody is pulling her strings around these things.
So hey, basically, Steve Hassan's basically telling MSNBC, telling millions of people on American cable news that Ginny Thomas was in a group therapy cult called LifeSpring. He then got her out of this group therapy cult called LifeSpring, and she was working with him. And that now she's in a cult called QAnon. This is raising some questions, because the Cult Awareness Network of Steve Hassan is supposed to be a group that just helps people to think for themselves. And I believe Steve Hassan's website is now called Freedom of Mind. It's all about just curing people of cult brainwashing, right? It's all about how to make sure that no one ever gets brainwashed by these evil cults ever again. People think for themselves, they're no longer brainwashed by these cults. And that's Steve Hassan's whole thing. So why would she have been in a cult, been in this, working with Steve Hassan for years in this group that teaches you to think for yourself, and now be back in another cult? What's going on here? Well, folks, this is where we have to get into the ugly side of who Steve Hassan really is. We have to explain what's really going on. And for that, we have a book, Brainwash, The Secret History of Mind Control. And this is, by the way, this is a very, very surface level book. If you really want to learn the history of attempts to control people's minds, you can read Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John D. Marks. This is about the CIA's MK Ultra program. This really gets into it. This is where you really learn what they were up to. But this is a pretty surface level. This is your typical Barnes & Noble introductory level, pop psychology, what is brainwashing book. But it talks about, so Steve Hassan, he was a member of the Unification Church, the Moonies, followers of Reverend Sun Myung Moon in the 1970s. He got out of the group, and then he joined the Cult Awareness Network. And what did the Cult Awareness Network do? Well, they were involved with a group of people who went around kidnapping people and deprogramming them from the Moonies. All right, if you were in a group, if you joined a religious group, and your parents didn't like it, even if you were a legal adult, Steve Hassan and his friends would kidnap you and hold you against your will, and then unbrainwash you. And this is what this book says about that whole process. Right? It talks about how the big deprogrammer was this guy named Ted Patrick. It says, quote, deprogramming even assumed a macabre sense of the absurd. New York deprogrammer Galen Kelly was sentenced to 7 years in jail in 1993 for staging a kidnapping on a Circle of Friends devotee and mistakenly snatching the wrong girl off the street, and apparently told a story of how a deprogrammer snapped a young girl out of her cult mind and returned her home. You'll be glad to know, crowed the triumphant deprogrammer, that your daughter is a Christian again. But, gasped the parents, she used to be Jewish. It goes on and describes what these deprogrammers used to do. Initially, there was so much antipathy regarding new religious movements that the deprogrammers won the press war. After all, if your children were recruited to a wacko cult, persuaded to hand over all their possessions, then sent out onto the streets to sell shoddy products for 20 hours a day without rest, proper food, or shelter, why wouldn't you do everything in your power to get them out? So successful were the deprogrammers at the start of Ted Patrick's crusade that even when the police were alerted to ongoing kidnappings by the screams of victims, they frequently looked the other way. In at least one case, when a devotee actually managed to escape the kidnappers and fled to the police seeking protection, they put him into a squad car and returned him to Ted Patrick for more treatment. That's odd. Does that happen? Do the police generally, when somebody's been kidnapped and they run away and go to the police station, do the police say, oh, and hand them back to the kidnapper? Is that something that normally happens, right? If someone runs to a police station and says, help me, I've been kidnapped, and the police say, and then they take them back to the kidnapper, is that normal behavior? Right? Now, this book just says, oh, it's because everyone believed the deprogrammers. Again, something else is going on here. But the book goes on. The attitude did not last. For many people, the kidnapping and incarceration of young Americans to remove them from their chosen religious beliefs was deeply unsettling. In 1973, a Time magazine feature likened deprogramming to the horrific, brain-blowing Lodvico technique used by Alex, the hero of Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. Ethically, the issue was fraught with problems, and it wasn't long before it became obvious that kidnapping people you didn't agree with, kidnapping people because you didn't agree with their religious beliefs was illegal. Although he always made sure that at least one parent of the child concerned was present throughout his operations, it wasn't much longer before Ted Patrick was serving time, and thank you, Andre, serving time for kidnapping. Now, this is where it gets really bizarre, right? Now, this is where they describe what Steve Hassan and the deprogrammers used to do. If the parents decided that the kid, after a while, it became illegal to actually kidnap people and hold them against their will, imagine. So here's how the deprogrammers, like Steve Hassan, described what they did. If the parents decided that the kid was allowed to leave when he wanted to, the game had to be played more carefully. It was a lot harder if you didn't lock the door, because they couldn't run and say, fuck you, I'm not talking to you. Because they could run and say, fuck you, I'm not talking to you. Without forcible incarceration, deprogramming was a lot like fly fishing. Set the hook and keep the line taut, but not too taut. Deprogramming without incarceration may have resembled fly fishing, but deprogramming with it was more like a war. As Ted Patrick had discovered, Unification Church members frequently refused to listen to reason and either sat there in a trance, chanting perpetually to avoid having to confront the issues he was raising. It was like talking to a brick wall. But he realized, was a means of snapping the subject back into reality so that he could start the dialogue. The split second when they reacted would be the thin of an end of a wedge that could be driven home. He said, I would do it by either scaring the shit out of them or making them really angry until something broke. I was rude and aggressive and insensitive and as nasty as I could be. High level intensity. I'd degrade them until they'd snap and come close to punching me out. And then we'd have something to talk about. Now, does this sound like healthy behavior? Is this a healthy kind of thing to do? Is you're degrading people, making them so angry that they snap? A little odd, isn't it? But it gets better. This is where it gets better. The Unification Church, that's the Moonies, appears to admit that they made mistakes in the 1970s. Well, that's an understatement. The question remains as to whether deprogramming was actually any better. Subjects were frequently treated with the same indoctrination techniques endured by recruits. Moreover, at the start of the operation, they were kidnapped and held against their will. Religious recruiters might be breaking normal bounds of acceptable behavior, but deprogrammers were breaking the law. Modern deprogrammers, they call themselves exit counselors, those still practicing, have distanced themselves from the term deprogramming because of its criminal connotations. And they say the technique used were as to sever those employed by new religious movements. Besides, deprogrammers were in the business of saving souls. The measures were used were justified by the end result. And funnily enough, this was exactly the same argument used by the Unification Church for its heavenly deception. Occasionally, evidence even emerged that the deprogrammers were up to no good. I mean, you get into this. Sociologists argued that anti-cult academics were waging an irrational war against groups that stood for anything outside of their own narrow-minded conservative worldview. They also alleged that, in their desperate effort to discredit cults, the anti-cult campaigners had become every bit as evangelical as their enemies. They had, in fact, become a cult. In response, the psychologists stated that anyone who had accepted cult hospitality, like sociologists, had therefore been paid off by the cult. Bad science was alleged by both sides. At one point, the arguments became so heated that a group of academics took another group to court, apparently disproving their particular theories and depriving them from future earnings as expert witnesses. So basically, what we have here is Steve Hassan was running a cult to fight cults. This is like nuts. In the name of fighting cults, he was kidnapping people and breaking them down and holding them against their will and reprogramming their minds and then recruiting them to fight against the cults. So it appears that Steve Hassan, the CNN's favorite cult expert, advisor to BreadTube, was involved in deprogramming a Supreme Court justice's wife, and that she was speaking at his events. And let's roll back the tape. What did she say on the tape? What did she say on the tape? What did she say? What did she say? What does Ginny Thomas say in the recording? What is she saying? What does she say?
Called a cult. Indeed, there's a newly released video from back in 1986 that shows her discussing her struggle after leaving that cult. The video was shared by Dr. Stephen Hassan. He's a mental health professional. He's an expert on cults. He works to get people out of.
Where is it? Where is the clip of what she says?
Back in 19.
Let's see what she says. I'm trying to pull up what she says because it's classic. She was involved in Steve Hassan's cult. I mean, that's basically what she admits in the clip. I showed it to you earlier. She was involved in Steve Hassan's anti-cult cult. That's basically what she says in the clip.
Leaving that cult, the video was shared by Dr. Stephen Hassan. He's a mental health.
Oh, well. You saw the clip earlier when I showed it. She was involved in Steve Hassan's anti-cult cult, which is nuttier, right? This is getting nuttier by the minute. So she was in this group, this self-help group, LifeSpring, and then she was in a group that's run by Steve Hassan. And in this clip, she's saying that she has to figure out how much time she wants to spend fighting the cult. She's working with Steve Hassan and she's dedicating her life to fighting against the cult with Steve Hassan. And now it's alleged that she's part of QAnon. Are we starting to see how weird all of this is and how bizarre this is all starting to be? But it gets better. It gets better. I believe I've got another clip to show you. No, that's not the one. All right, what's it called? All right. Okay. Got another clip to show you. This is wild. All right. This is shortly after January 6th. Shortly after January 6th. This is February 8th, right after January 6th. We have Steve Austin appears on CNN, basically, as an expert on QAnon being a cult.
Do you think it is a cult?
I do. I think it's an authoritarian cult, indeed.
Tell me how. What are the signs?
So installing phobias in their minds and unethical groups, and the process of helping people to reality test is best done through family members and friends who know the person personally.
We'll come back to your point on reality in a second, but Stephen, on the one hand, some of these QAnon believers are becoming disillusioned after they saw Biden actually being sworn in, right? But then on the other hand, you have the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, member of Congress, hasn't been denounced very loudly by Republicans. Under pressure, she said she backed away from conspiracy theories. But if you are a fervent, QAnon believer, what does that tell you?
It tells me that she is not really out of the QAnon orbit and indoctrination. She's doing it for political purposes to back away. I like that message from her might help some people who are involved with QAnon to start questioning. But the bottom line is a real process has to happen of educating people about what is brainwashing and mind control. Help people go back in time to when they first heard of the group and to pick apart what got to them. Like, what was it, the hypnotic
How do you do that?
video?
How do you do that, Stephen? How do you, it's so obvious for some of us who, quite frankly, live in reality. The sky is up, the sky is blue, period. But for some of these folks, it's easy for people watching to think these people are crazy, shrug it off. But this is really what they believe. How do you yank them out of it and into reality?
So, Brooke, part of the problem is our devices, and if you're in a cult and all you're hearing is cult messaging and you're not hearing other things, it's very hard to get someone to take, that step back and to reality test. So always the formula for me when I'm asked, how do you know if you're under mind control? You need to take a total break from whatever group you're involved with, like no contact for several days, a week is even better. Walk in the woods, listen to music you used to love to listen to, reconnect with family and friends. And part of the problem is a dynamic happens when people get into a destructive cult where they either try to recruit their family so intensely that they back off and even cut off contact, or the family tries to rationally argue them out, which just propels them deeper in. So the family and friends need to be educated about strategically how to ask questions from a curious yet concerned posture that's actually going to develop rapport and trust again and empower the person to take a step back, learn about brainwashing and mind control, reconsider how they got into this rabbit hole, and realize there's hope. People like myself, I was in the moon cult for 2.5 years. I needed help getting out. But I was so glad my family made the effort to help me, Brooke.
And you got out and you have the hope and now you're helping others. I have so many more questions.
Some previous trauma and from this because
of the books heard that former QAnon member Melissa, cult experience. Do you think it is a cult?
I do. I think it's an authoritarian cult, indeed.
Tell me how. What are the signs?
So deceptive recruitment, controlling people's behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make people dependent and obedient.
disconnecting their ability to reality test, installing phobias in their minds, that the enemy is here and the only hope is to follow the grand leader. And essentially, there really is a difference between ethical groups and unethical groups, and the process of helping people to reality test is best done through family members.
So he's on there basically talking about how we need deprogramming. And he did. I think they've removed the clip, but in the BreadTube book, I quote what he said on CNN. I have the date and everything, where he called for mass deprogramming of the country in the aftermath of Donald Trump's presidency. He's quite a wild figure. And his advisor, his mentor, is Robert J. Lifton, the U.S. military psychiatrist. And it appears that among the Cult Awareness Network and among the deprogrammers were a number of people involved with Project MK Ultra and the CIA program, right? So there were people, and this is, that two anti-cult experts, this is in the book, Brainwash, two anti-cult experts in particular, Dr. Margaret Singer and Louis John Jolin West, came into the firing left. West, it turns out, in the smear campaign that followed, it was pointed out that both had been connected to the CIA's MK Ultra brainwashing program during the Cold War. So we have a situation here where the wife of a Supreme Court justice was recruited out of one cult by Steve Hassan. She joined Steve Hassan's cult, and now she's accused of being in QAnon. This is getting stupider by the minute. This is getting more and more ridiculous by the minute. And what's going on here? When you really get down to it, the more that you look into this stuff, and I have, trust me, I've been trying to make sense of all of this and figure out what the hell is going on. Read Search for the Manchurian Candidate, CIA Mind Control. Read Poisoner in Chief by Stephen Kinzer. Other books. There's no there. There's nothing there. There are groups of people, and some groups have more cohesion than others. Some groups are more abusive and authoritarian than others, and some aren't. That's really all there is to it. That's all there is to it. The whole cult thing, the whole brainwashing thing, the CIA basically realized you can't really brainwash people. You can't. You can try, but the person on some level has to want to be brainwashed, or it's not going to work. You can't really control other people's minds. Most people conform to the group that they're in, and that's a fact. Most people just perform, just conform. That's just a fact. They conform, and that's reality. And people, if they're in a group, they tend to do what the rest of the group is doing. That's how human beings operate. There's really nothing there, right? And, all the things that you think of as quote unquote brainwashing are done routinely in the U.S. military, for example. Boot camp is classic brainwashing. You talk about breaking somebody down, breaking their ego, subjecting them to huge amount of stress, lack of sleep, lack of food, breaking down their personality, reconstructing them. I mean, anyone who's known anyone who has had a relative in the military, they are a different person when they come back from boot camp. They are subject to a huge amount of manipulation and psychological manipulation. And again, there's a continuum, and every group, to some degree or other, there's going to be group conformity. There's going to be a group hierarchy. There's going to be group rules. And some groups are more explicitly abusive and inappropriate than others. But there's really no magic involved. But it appears that among the ruling class, what group you're in and what kind of manipulation you're subject to and who is pulling your strings and who is giving you orders is a very big deal. And Steve Hassan is somebody who's well connected to the intelligence agencies, right? I mean, his mentor was Robert J. Lifton, and he was involved in kidnapping people with the Cult Awareness Network in order to unbrainwash them. And he was apparently working very closely with the wife of a Supreme Court justice. And now he's releasing video to discredit her But in essence, he's discrediting himself, because if he cured her of being brainwashed, why is she back in a cult? If she worked with him for years, then why is she back in a cult if she was never in a cult? The whole thing is just bizarre. And this is an empire in decline. That's really what you have to look at this. This is an empire in decline. I talked about the Roman mystery cults. I talked about, the cult of the Navy, the cult of Neptune. They had Mithras, and this is an empire in decline. And it appears that there are factions in the deep state and in the intelligence agencies and in the Pentagon that are fighting against each other. And there's a creep named Steve Hassan, a glowy if there ever was one, who's advising BreadTube, is obsessed with hating Russia, and is whispering in the ear of Supreme Court justices, and is whispering in the ear of BreadTube, and somehow thinks that cults and all things bad are traced back to Russia. And now he's being used to out the fact that a Supreme Court justice used to work with him. Are you seeing a society in decline right here? Are you seeing the capitalists fighting amongst themselves? Because that's what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing insanity on a society-wide level. I am seeing gangs and counter gangs. I'm seeing Sorelian formations. I am seeing mass insanity in the breakdown of a society. And I hope that everything I just said made sense. We went really deep into it. We talked about who Steve Hassan is. We talked about the role of the mystery cults in ancient Rome. We talked about how there are factions within the U.S. deep state fighting against each other. We talked about how it's clear there are some forces in the Pentagon that don't agree with the anti-Russia campaign. There's some strange stuff going on right now. There's some very, very, very strange stuff. How do you think groups with outside or esoteric religious beliefs should be dealt with? And do you see them as a problem? I just wanted to give you the lowdown. That was a deep dive. It was a deep dive into a lot of things that are going on here. It's related to my war with BreadTube and who's been advising BreadTube. It's related to the anti-Russian hysteria and who seems to be manipulating government officials and blaming Russia. And, how many other government officials is Steve Hassan advising? How many other U.S. government officials has Steve Hassan helped to deprogram, right, with his non-cult cult that just happened to, engage in activities that seem, oddly culty, and at the same time, what's going on with Ginny Thomas and what's going on with the Pentagon? Again, I'm just helping you understand how confused all of this is getting. So anyway, at this point, folks, roll call. We'll do the roll call. I'll call you out as I see you, and then we'll start answering your super chat questions. So if people have super chat questions they want me to answer, please go ahead and shoot me a super chat, and I will give you an answer. And now, names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Rice from Adelaide, Australia is with us tonight. Very, very good. Nassau County, Char Darling. Phil from Miami, Florida. Raphael in Brazil. Ryan in Oakland. Shout out to you. Class Analysis. Chris in Salt Lake City. Chaya in Montreal. David. Tristan in Maryland. Parasocialite. Shout out to you. Jenny Lynn is with us from Cincinnati. St. David's, Bermuda. Then to go Australia, David Fox. Dario from Brooklyn. Elias from Wisconsin. Redneck Red from West Virginia. John Whitty in Houston. Green Bay, Wisconsin. Dylan Small in California. Rodigo in Brazil. Kinky is present. Shout out to you. Don D in NYC. Ash in Chicago. Bob Troy. Mindanao to Midwest. Paris to the Plains. Kansas City, Missouri. Catherine Crosby of Springfield, Missouri. Charlie from Canada. Delaware. Calgary, Canada. Sierra Vista, Arizona. Charlie from Canada. Catherine of Springfield, Missouri. Detroit, Michigan. Los Angeles. Calgary, Canada. Great Great to have you all here, folks. Micah from Las Vegas is with us. Colorado Springs, Naples, Florida, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Canada. Marissa from Washington State. Micah from Las Vegas. Bendu from American Autopsy in Delaware. You want to have me on your show soon. You are doing great work on that channel. Go check out American Autopsy's channel, by the way. He just did an awesome video about the 4-point plan of the Center for Political Innovation. Go and check out, go and subscribe to his channel right now. And I will come on your show, American Autopsy. You've come on here. We've had exchanges on here before, but I will come on your show. Let's schedule the time. I'm getting a lot of requests right now, but you are on my list of people that I need to talk to. So let's be in touch. I would love to come on your show. We got St. Louis, Bradley Wasser, Maryland and San Diego, Vinicius from Brazil, Kendall in San Diego, Nevin from Coral Springs, Dan from Oxford, Liverpool, Dallas, Texas, Isaiah, Nevin from Coral Springs, Florida, Kendall in San Diego, Irish Anger is applauding. Very, very good. Liverpool, Kieran from Soviet San Diego. There you go. Palmer, Michigan, chopped liver. Oh, they have good liver out there. Greendale Lake, New York. X from Iceland. New Bern, North Carolina. Very, very, very good, folks. So glad to have you with us. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always fun to talk about what's going on in the world. Eco Whiskey from Melbourne, Australia. Kurrick from Florida via PACD Discord. Welcome, Kurrick. Google is not a verb. Nathaniel in Newark, Washington, D.C. J.C. Farrell, Golmaro, California. Nathaniel in Newark. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. All right. Palmer, Massachusetts. We got Palmer, Massachusetts going on. Wild times, folks. Wild times. Flagstaff, Arizona, Oklahoma. Doug Phillips from Mars, Flagstaff, Florida. All right, folks. So now we're going to start answering super chat questions. So if there is a super chat question you would like me to answer, now is the time to shoot it to me. Recent protests in Peru. I believe that there is an attempt to remove Pedro Castillo, right? That Pedro Castillo is the president of Peru, but he doesn't really have the power. He was forced to dump his foreign minister. He appointed a communist foreign minister, and then the Congress basically dumped that foreign minister because he had said a number of anti-imperialist things. There's now a foreign minister who doesn't agree with Pedro Castillo. And it appears that now there is kind of a right-wing movement to remove Pedro Castillo. Not good for Peru. It took a long time for Peru to build kind of an anti-monopoly coalition. Pedro Castillo is a leftist, but it seems that he's gotten into office without the ability to do a lot of things. So there you go. That's what I think of that. The Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy established by Biden. Folks, this is what I think about that. All right. The U.S. government has been dumping a huge amount of money, and a huge amount of money has been dumped into combating disinformation on the internet. And what do they consider to be disinformation? Anything that goes against their narrative, right? They're accusing Russia of committing this horrendous massacre, the Bucha massacre. Now, Russia has asked for a UN meeting to debunk that, and the United States and Britain have said no. The Pentagon is saying they cannot confirm that it happened. However, in their minds, if you get up and say that you don't think this massacre was committed by Russia, they call that disinformation. And they are dumping loads and loads of money. And they're not really telling us exactly what operations it's going to. But it's going to combating disinformation. Combating disinformation. And you can look at some of these documents. They have a list of websites they don't like, right? One of these documents, I reported on it for RT. It's just a list of websites they don't like, right? New Eastern Outlook magazine that I used to write for. They don't like it, right? The Duran, they don't like it. And because they don't like these websites, they write reports about them. And then they ask Congress to give them billions of dollars to fight against these websites. What do you think's going on here, folks? What do you think's going on here? If you get up and you say that, Russia's intervention in Ukraine is probably based on the fact that You know, there's neo-Nazi gangs there. They've been bombing and shelling the Donetsk and the Lugansk Republic for a long time. 14,000 people are dead. They're talking about getting nuclear weapons. There's bio labs there. They're tied in with the Pentagon. If you bring that up, they immediately say that's Russian disinformation. That's what they're fighting against. They're fighting against facts that counter their narrative. They're fighting against anything that doesn't fit their overall agenda. And they've poured billions and billions of dollars into, the State Department has a division of people that are working on the internet to quote unquote counter disinformation. And now they're setting up this new bureau. I think we know what's going on here. There's a huge effort to prevent people from listening to news outlets like RT and CGTN. There's a huge effort to try and keep people from watching content like this YouTube channel. I'm surprised we've lasted this long. I've never had a strike. I follow the rules of YouTube. But I'm surprised this channel is still up here. Subscribe on Rockfin right now if you haven't. I'm streaming on Rockfin right now. Subscribe on Rockfin because, I don't know how much longer they're going to let me be on here. They're already trying to prevent people from watching it. That's pretty clear. That's happening. But there you go. Subscribe on Rockfin. But it's shocking. It's shocking to me, that they have spent so much money. Billions of dollars is spent on combating disinformation on the internet, which is basically facts they don't like. Something's going on, folks. And the fact that all these Ukraine bots out of nowhere, it's like anything. There's all these like fanatical Ukraine flag accounts that just cuss out anyone who says anything critical. Something's going on. Told you about Steve Hassan advising BreadTube. Told you about these BreadTube videos that come out that, all these people have been informed that I must be a Nazi, even though I've spent my life as an anti-racist activist. Something's going on here, folks. Something's going on. Something is going on. Something is definitely going on. And if you want to believe it or not. Now, the person who super chatted about Nasera Gassera, I don't know enough about that. I Googled it. Google is not a verb, as they say, but someone super chatted that before the live began. I looked into it. It's something I know absolutely nothing about. So I can't talk about it because I know nothing about it. And if I talk about it, I'll say the wrong thing because I don't know anything about it. I saw the Wikipedia page, which is probably unfair. I guess it's like a law that was proposed, and then there's somebody alleging that it was actually passed secretly or something. I don't know anything about it. Is there a cold civil war going on? That's a good way of putting it. I had never thought about that, but it's like when we have a cold war, that's when two countries are like facing off in a geopolitical game against each other. They're not directly fighting. And you could argue that within the deep state, there's a cold civil war going on. I think that's very, very accurate. Look at what just happened. That story with those Secret Service agents and how the Secret Service agents that were protecting Jill Biden were penetrated. Look at that story. I talked about it last night on the stream. Oh my God. Look into that. That's not an accident. That's not a random occurrence. Something's going on there. The fact that Joe Biden's family Secret Service was penetrated. There's two guys who've been arrested for impersonating Department of Homeland Security agents who penetrated Joe Biden's inner circle. There is a fight going on among the deep state apparatus. And that's what that whole opening stream was about. I was trying to explain to you what's going on, where this came from. But there we go. All right. A cold civil war. That's a good way of putting it. What do I think of David Harvey and Slavoj Žižek? Well, David Harvey is an academic, and he teaches Marx's Capital. And he's written on the history of neoliberalism. I find his writing on the history of neoliberalism to be very insightful. And his lectures on Capital are interesting. Honestly, I don't, it's not exactly where I'm at. I've listened to some of his lectures on Capital, and they're okay. I mean, not really where I'm at. He's looking at things from more of an academic perspective. I think on one of them, he starts talking about, he studied Capital with a group of theater majors, and then he studied Capital with a group of economists, and then he studied Capital with a group of different groups. He's talking about like literary influences on Karl Marx, and it's much more academic in its approach. I come at Marxism from an activist approach, right? I mean, that's how I learned Marxism. I learned it from people who'd been protesting the Vietnam War, protesting in support of the Black Panthers. I come at Marxism from an activist perspective, not an academic one. That's why I like William Z. Foster and his textbooks, right? The History of the Three Internationals. That's why I like, the Foundations of Marxism, Leninism, which is a very important. I come at this from an activist perspective. I'm not seeing this in an academic way. David Harvey is very much an academic, and so is Slavoj Žižek. Now, Slavoj Žižek comes at things. He's not a Marxist per se. I mean, he's got a Marxist influence, but he's heavily influenced by psychoanalysis. I found it very entertaining, the movie that Slavoj Žižek made, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. I actually went to the movie theater with a friend of mine. We went and saw in the theater Slavoj Žižek's movie. Is Telegram a good alternative? Yeah, I'm on Telegram. It's good. It's good alternative, sure. Slavoj Žižek, he made this movie, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. And it's basically a movie of him talking about movies and giving his kind of Freudian Marxist analysis of the movies. Some parts of it were very disagreeable. Some parts of it I didn't quite get what he was getting at. Some parts of it were very insightful in ways that he may not have even meant for it to be insightful. One thing I thought was amusing is he showed a sitcom, a situation comedy that was popular, I believe, in Czechoslovakia. It was a TV show that was on air in Czechoslovakia. And he talked about how it was key in bringing down the socialist government of Czechoslovakia. The Marxist-Leninist government was toppled, and that this TV program was very key in like the psychological operations that kind of set the stage for bringing down the socialist government. Why? He said, well, the TV program, it made fun not of the leaders of the country, but of ordinary people. It had it showed police officers that were bumbling fools. It showed government bureaucrats that were bumbling fools. And that I think Zizek, he's like, it tore down the myth of the people, the idea that the people are good. It tears down the myth. But if you watch it, he's basically saying that by getting out there the idea that people are bumbling fools, people are stupid, people are idiots, that's how you tear down socialism. I think that's a very good point. And I don't think he meant it that way. I don't think he meant but that's a very, very good point. And that's what, it's kind of what Hannah Arendt is getting at in her Eichmann in Jerusalem book. She's arguing that, that deep down, ordinary people are all a bunch of Nazis, right? I mean, she's not talking about the role of, the role of big corporations in the Holocaust. She's not talking about, the fact that Germany was a very, very progressive place prior to the Nazis coming in. Germany had a gay rights movement before anybody did, basically. There was a gay rights movement in Berlin. There was a huge communist party. But she just plays up the idea that Adolf Eichmann, this brutal Nazi war criminal, was just an ordinary person. And that proves that deep down, ordinary people are Nazis, and we need, our academic overlords to kind of rule over us and protect us from the rabble, and only the enlightened intellectuals are trustworthy because average people, average working class people are dangerous, right? That's the kind of narrative. That's the neoliberal narrative. When you break down, when you get people to have an outlook that says humanity is the enemy, average people, the working class, the broad masses are the mob. That's what Ayn Rand says in her autobiography, or not in her autobiography. And if you read The Fountainhead, if you read Atlas Shrugged, the people are the enemy. That's very, very clear. There's the great men, the Motors of the world, the Howard Rourkes, the John Galtz. They're the great individuals. But then the rest of the people are the mob, the rabble who tear them down. We ordinary working people, we're holding back the rich. We're holding back the geniuses. We're this dangerous mob of others. This is Nietzsche. This is largely Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's like a bastardized Nietzsche, right? This is Leo Strauss and his Persecution and the Art of Writing, and this is the Straussian worldview. And it's a very, very dangerous worldview. But if you can get people to view their fellow human beings with contempt, you can get people to see other people as the enemy and as dangerous, and to isolate themselves, then you can rule over them. When humanity is reduced to atomized individuals, you can roll over them. But when people come together and they form groups and they dedicate their lives to causes and they work together to achieve things and they make sacrifices and they feel loyalty to each other, this is very, very, very dangerous to the liberal order. This is very, very dangerous to the ruling class. And Slavoj Žižek, in his movie The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, he talks about how creating this cynical attitude in the Eastern Bloc countries with these comedy TV programs that weren't about the leaders, weren't about making fun of the leaders of socialist countries, but were instead about tearing down average people and showing average people to be buffoons. That was very key in doing that. Now, another thing that stood out in Slavoj Žižek's movie, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, if I remember correctly, some of it is just basic stuff. He talks about how Coke makes you thirsty. If you drink Diet Coke or regular Coke, makes you thirsty. And that's a consumerism tapping into, we have this desire to crave, satisfy our cravings and crave again, right? And it's like, he talks about that and how Coke has been so successful because it makes you thirsty. It's a drink that makes you thirsty, and that's why it's so popular, because we want to crave, right? We want to be hungry and eat, and then be hungry again and then eat, right? It's not about, if we were just never hungry again, that wouldn't be satisfying, right? And that's interesting. That's an interesting insight into how human psychology works. That's like basic Freudian psychoanalysis. But he talks about that. The thing that I thought was the most disturbing about the film, I will just tell you, and spoiler alert, I mean, if you're going to go watch Slavoj Žižek's Pervert's Guide to Ideology, I can't snort the way he does, but, he snorts, and the Pervert's Guide to, but the way it ends, I was furious with the way it ends. So it ends with him saying that, the problems of capitalism are all still there, but the problem is that communism, that was meant to address all the problems of capitalism, just made things worse. And I'm just like, I'm in this little movie theater about ready to stand up, and and he says, but maybe it's time to bring back some of the demands of the left, like jobs and housing and education. And they're playing like the triumphant march at the end of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as he's showing the Occupy Wall Street protests. That da-dun, 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 like the triumphant march, basically. And that's how it ends. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, how on earth does he get away with that? Communism did not make things worse in Russia. Communism did not make things worse in China. Communism did not make things worse in Cuba. What was China like before the communists came in? And what is it like now? Not worse, I'll tell you that much. Electrified, running water, 800 million people lifted out of poverty, wiping out illiteracy, made life worse. I'm sorry. Life expectancy greatly expanded, access to modern technology. I mean, the communists have done miracles in China. So they didn't make life worse. The Soviet Union, before the communists came in, agrarian country, underdeveloped. It was the Soviet Union that industrialized and electrified and built up the Soviet Union and defeated the Nazi invaders and invented space travel. It's like, how in the world can he say it made life worse? Cuba, look at Cuba before the communists came in. Fidel Castro came in there. Cuba's got a better life expectancy than almost every other country in the Caribbean. Compare Cuba to Haiti, compare Cuba to Jamaica. I mean, give me a break. How do they say this? But it's just everyone knows this. And so he's like, well, the communism that was meant to address the problems of capitalism only made life worse. But maybe we need to bring back some of the demand. Like, what is he talking about? That's the weird thing about Zizek, because he does this weird, it's like this weird mind game he's playing with you. Where it's like he calls himself a Stalinist. He'll take pictures with Stalin, but he repeats all of the, anti-Stalin narrative. It's just that he says that he likes the Freudian idea of a father figure who tells you right from wrong or something. He likes the Freudian concept of a good father figure who is telling you what's right and wrong or something. It's like, then you don't like Stalin, dude. You like some kind of weird Freudian thing. I don't know enough about it. I really don't know enough about that. I really don't know. I don't know what goes on there. But anyway, you don't like Stalin at that. It's like this weird thing. He's supposed to be a Stalinist. He's supposed to be a Maoist. He's supposed to be an ultra Marxist. But then, you listen to him, the debate with Jordan Peterson. All right. The opening statement of Jordan C. Peterson, where he's reading from the Communist Manifesto, is one of the most cringe and embarrassing. I've actually got it cut up. I'm planning to respond to it at one point because it shows you Jordan Peterson has absolutely no clue what the F he's talking about when it comes to communism. None. I mean, the guy has no idea. And Zizek just kind of ignored Jordan Peterson and gave his own speech, which was very anti-China, but was critical of Western capitalism, etc. And I mean, Zizek may have been right to do that. I don't know. Slovak Zizek may have been correct in order to do that. I mean, you know, if he had just steamrolled Jordan Peterson, that's what we all want, right? We're all watching debates on the internet, on Twitch, and we want to just see people be steamrolled. That's not a professional way to do things, right? And it may be that Jordan Peterson, I mean, you know, there was supposed to be a debate between Jordan Peterson and Richard Wolff, and then the Jordan Peterson people pulled out. They canceled it, right? And it may be that in order to debate Jordan Peterson, you have to basically agree not to steamroll him, because he has no effing clue what he's talking about. I have multiple videos on this channel debunking Jordan Peterson. He has no idea. He says that Hitler was elected by a huge majority. That's false. He says that, Russia was a paradise compared to what the Bolsheviks did with it. That's ridiculous. I mean, he has no idea about class struggle. He thinks that all these liberals, these postmodernists running around, he thinks they're all communists. They're not communists. He thinks they're all Marxists. He thinks cancel culture on the universities is the same thing as what Gus Hall and William Z. Foster fought for and what the labor movement was all about. He has no idea, what he's talking about. And it's obnoxious. And if a real Marxist were to debate Jordan Peterson, they would just roll right over him. So they always have a liberal debate him. They always have a feminist debate him, or they have, it's almost like, it's like Zizek, he may have had to agree to just do his own thing. And it wasn't a debate. It was two people speaking. It was two speeches. It was like one guy spoke to his fans and they all loved it. Another guy spoke to his fans and they all loved it. And they may as well not have been in the same room together. So there you go. There you go. All righty. Now, I showed the clip last night from MSNBC about how unbelievable it is, where MSNBC is basically praising U.S. officials for lying, and saying it's genius because they're getting ahead of Russian disinformation. I mean, I showed the clip last night. I think I still have the clip here. We can just show it again because, if we have the clip, we'll just show it again because, again, this clip basically takes apart everything that mainstream media has said. It's like utterly shocking that this clip should be a scandal. And I guess we'll just show it again here. Yeah, we're gonna show it again because do we have it here? Where is it? I haven't deleted it, I don't think, right? Do we have the clip? I've got the clip here because it's worth showing again. It really is, because it's that bad, right? It's like holy crap. This is the clip. We'll just show it.
Intelligence to fight an information war and doing it to Russia for months now, and it's working. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney live in Washington. Ken, I want to start by giving people an example of what this is so they know what we're talking about. Take a look.
They're also suggesting that Ukraine has biological and chemical weapons in Ukraine. That's a clear sign he's considering using both of those.
Ken, can you explain to our viewers what was going on there and what NBC News has learned about that claim this week from 3 different U.S. officials?
Yeah, that was a great example of what we're talking about. That was based on declassified intelligence, but we're also told the intelligence wasn't very clear about what exactly was going on. And they decided to disclose it as a way of deterring Russia from doing that and putting the world on notice that this could happen. And that's what's going on here, the big picture. This is an unprecedented use of declassified intelligence. We've never seen this level of information warfare before from the U.S. government. And what they're doing is they're trying to preempt the Russians, get ahead of Russian disinformation, even mess with Vladimir Putin's brain.
They lied. That's what it is. They announced that Russia was planning to carry out a chemical weapons attack when they weren't going to. That's called lying. No, it's not. That's called lying. That's what that's called. They said that Russia was planning a chemical attack, and it wasn't. Okay? No matter how you dance around that, that's called lying.
One person put it, leave him off balance to try to show that the United States knows what Russia is up to and is going to get ahead of it. It's really rather remarkable. Another example was when they announced that Russia had gone to China to ask for help with getting some weapons. That hasn't come to pass yet, and it was almost a way of putting China on notice.
It hasn't come to pass, meaning that you lied. You came out and said that Russia was doing something with China that they weren't doing. You told us things that were false.
Hey, we know what's going on here. Don't let this happen. So really interesting and unprecedented use of intelligence here, Alice.
Yeah, Ken, as you just said, not just intelligence here, unprecedented use. One U.S. official telling you it doesn't even have to be solid intelligence when we talk about it. It's more important to get out ahead of them.
So not only are U.S. officials lying, Biden is saying Russia's planning chemical attacks when they ain't. Biden's saying that Russia and China is going to China to buy stuff or get weapons when they're not. But not only are they lying to us, but now they're running these segments telling us that we should be amazed. Look how awesome it is that they lied. If that doesn't grind your gears, I mean, U.S. media is not honest. U.S. media is not engaging in journalism. It's engaging in information warfare, and not against Russia, but against your brain. Joe Biden wants you to believe that Russia is so evil that they were thinking about doing a chemical weapons attack when they weren't. Joe Biden wants you to be so upset that Russia and China are going to have weapons when they weren't. Like, I'm sorry, the target of this disinformation is not Russia. You think the Russians believe Joe Biden? You think the Russians are the one? No, the target is you. And the fact that U.S. media would not only let them get away with this, but would run a segment like this about how good it is that they lied. I mean, if this doesn't tell you why you shouldn't watch mainstream media, I mean, this is big. This is huge. They're admitting that they lied. They're admitting that they lied. And now they're trying to get us to think it's good that they lied. And it's smart. It's so great. You can't trust mainstream media. They lied to you. They lied to you. And they said that, that Russia had killed the 13 sailors on Snake Island. And that was a lie. The sailors are still alive. Yes, the recording of them saying F you was real, but those sailors on Snake Island are real. They talked about this heroic fighter pilot, the ghost of Kirkov, who was shooting down Russian planes. That wasn't true. That was a lie. They've accused Russia of bombing a theater, and Russia said, no, we didn't do that. We didn't have any airstrikes in the area. They're now trying to tell us that Russia carried out the Bucha massacre, and the Pentagon won't confirm it. Pentagon won't confirm it, and they won't allow a UN meeting to happen to actually discuss it because it looks a lot like Russia didn't do it. They're lying, and 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 they're lying. And now, just the icing on the cake is they're running segments like this where they admit that they lie, and they say it's a good thing. Oh, it's good. We're getting ahead of Russian disinformation. I mean, wow. Wow. I mean, and now whenever I bring up the biolabs in Ukraine, this is my favorite. Whenever I bring up the biolabs in Ukraine, a bunch of people tweet at me and say, that's a conspiracy theory. That never happened. That's retarded. Oh, that's the dumbest thing. That's a conspiracy theory. And then, if it's a conspiracy theory, you shouldn't just be mad about me talking about it. There's some other people talking about it. Again, I may be repeating myself. I may be showing the same clips. But it's necessary because this is, pretty big deal here.
Let me ask you.
Thank you, Andre.
Does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So
Hold up. I thought it was a crazy conspiracy theory. I thought it was a crazy Alex Jones conspiracy theory. Oh, no. First of all, what's the question? What does Marco Rubio ask?
Let me ask you. Does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Now, he's not asking, does Ukraine have harmless biological labs that do blood tests? That is not what he asked. Marco Rubio, U.S. member of Congress, asks the Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, does Ukraine have biological weapons? That is what he asked her. And did she respond with no? No. Did she respond with absolutely not? No. This is how she responded. I don't quite know how to answer this and say something that won't get quoted.
Ukraine has
how can I use the words here and not say what they actually are?
biological research facilities.
Biological research facilities.
Which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of.
And why might you be worried about Russian forces getting control of them if they're harmless facilities? And why, may I ask, why did you mention them when he asked you about biological weapons if they're harmless, happy, fun facilities? And why did you respond to the question? He asked her, does Ukraine have biological weapons? And she's like, oh, geez, how do I put this? They have, and then she says it. Listen to the voice. This is classic, right?
They're now quite biological.
I'm choosing my words very carefully here.
Research facilities.
Research facilities.
Which, in fact, we're now
worried about something. Why would you be worried if they're happy, fun research facilities that are just, they're just doing fun stuff and COVID tests and
quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of.
Well, and why would you be worried about them? Why would you be worried about Russian forces gaining control of? I mean, hello, if you think that's a crazy conspiracy theory, I don't know what to say. I just showed you the clip of a U.S. Undersecretary of State. In that clip, 1, she was asked about biological weapons. 2, she responded with, well, I can't exactly say that they're weapons, but they're, what am I going to call them here? Research facilities. Oh boy. And we're really worried Russia might get their hands on them. I mean, and immediately when I bring this up, whenever I tweet about this, I get a bunch of people tweeting at me, there's no biolabs, you're retarded, you're an idiot, oh, you believe Russian propaganda, don't believe anything he says, he works at RT. I get all these people who say that the whole thing is made up. And then, after the barrage, the first lie in response is a bluff, right? And they assume people will believe them, right? And that they could just attack me because I work at RT and, oh my God, don't believe anything he says. He's Russian propaganda, blah, 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 blah. That's the first attempt. So they just lie. And then when they can't just lie anymore, then they say, oh yeah, well, they're not weapons facilities. They're research facilities, which is then, if that's the case, why did Victoria Nuland respond to a question about weapons by bringing them up? And why are they worried about Russia getting their hands on them? And why are they being funded by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine? And why are they being funded by the Pentagon Threat Assessment Department? Come on, right? And no, I'm not saying COVID came from there. I have never said that COVID came from these labs. That is not what I am saying at all. I never said that, right? Alex Jones might be saying that. I'm not Alex Jones. But these biolabs did exist and do exist. And they do clearly have some military purpose. That's what the Pentagon and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense do. And I'm sorry, would we be okay with Russia building a bunch of biological weapon research facilities in Mexico? Give me a break. But no. The U.S. government toppled the Ukrainian government in 2014. The U.S. government's been arming crazy bands of extremist Nazis in Ukraine. And now to top it off, we find out the USA's got a bunch of labs where they're doing military, bioweapon research, on their border. But Russia intervening and doing something about it is absolutely crazy. It's just evil Putin. I mean, it's like this narrative. How can people, it frustrates me. It really does. The only way that you can buy into their narrative is to not know any of this. That's really what it is, right? If you only consume CNN, if you only consume MSNBC, if you only consume BBC, you'd never know that these biolabs exist. You would never know that the USA toppled the Ukrainian government in 2014. You'd never know the USA has been piling weapons in there. You'd never know that Ukraine talked about getting nuclear weapons. You'd never know any of this, right? And that's what they depend on. And that's why they banned RT from YouTube. And that's why they forced a situation where RT America had to shut down. And that's why they put Russian state affiliated media on my Twitter and to try and discredit me. The only way you can buy into the American narrative about Ukraine is if you don't know anything. They're trying to conceal the facts from you. That's what they're doing, right? They're not deprogramming you. They're reprogramming you. This is Steve Hassan all over again, right? Everything you don't agree with is Russian propaganda, so therefore you've got to get American propaganda. They are completely doing exactly what they accuse their detractors of. It's exactly, it is exactly what they accuse their detractors of. At this point, I said this last night, I'm going to say this again, and then we got a couple more super chats to get through. But, at this point, you got to ask yourself, now, who are you going to believe? U.S. media has every incentive to lie, and they have lied over and over and over again. And why are they lying? Because no matter what they say, if Joe Biden comes out and says that, Russia's planning a chemical attack in Russia, and it's not true, U.S. media is still going to report it as if it's true. And then afterwards, they're going to do a story and say, wow, wasn't that great that he lied to us and said Russia was going to do this evil thing they never intended to do? There you go. Very funny. But, so mainstream media is not going to hold them accountable. And they lied about the ghost of Kirkov, and they lied about the Snake Island sailors, and they lied about the Mariupol theater thing, and they're lying now pretty clearly about the Bucha massacre. Even the Pentagon won't confirm what Biden's saying. And when they get caught lying, U.S. media just comes out and says it's brilliant that they lied. So are you going to believe these people? Or Russia, on the other hand, no matter what Russia says, anything that Russia says, they immediately circle their wagons and say, that's a conspiracy theory. That's not true. And because Russia knows that that will be the response to anything they say, Dmitry Peskov, the people they've got at the UN, when they come out, they bring loads of evidence with them. With the biolabs, they had documents with the signatures of Pentagon officials on them. Because Russia knows that whatever they say is going to be accused of being propaganda or accused of being disinformation, they bend over backwards to prove everything that they are saying. Now, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the people that are on the defensive, that know that they'll always be accused of lying, so they're going to bend over backwards to prove everything they say? Or are you going to believe the people who lie over and over and over and over again because they know they'll get away with it? It seems obvious to me who's telling the truth and who's lying. The Russians are telling the truth, and the United States government is lying. And if that's not obvious to you at this point, I don't know what to say. And people are going to say, oh, Caleb, you think Russia doesn't do anything wrong? You think there's no corruption there? You think there's not inequality there? I never said any of that. There's a lot of inequality in Russia, a lot of corruption in Russia. Russia's not telling the truth because Russians always do the right thing and America's evil. That's not what I'm saying. Russia's telling the truth because they're in a situation where they have to tell the truth because everyone accuses them of lying all the time. Meanwhile, the United States is lying because they can get away with it. And they have a media that will let them get away with it and will say it's brilliant. I just showed you the MSNBC clip. And we'll show you. We'll have them, we'll just treat it like it's okay. It's brilliant. Oh, they lied. That's brilliant. That's the situation there, folks. Russia's telling the truth because they have to. The United States is lying because they can get away with it. And they have a media that will circle the wagons and let them get away with it. And that's what's going on. You know, and that's how it is. And if you look at the facts objectively, that's how it's going on. That's what's happening. So there you go. All right. How do you think groups with outsider and esoteric religious beliefs should be dealt with? Consequences of potential midterm election wave. All right, very good. Election wave. You know, let me say this. Esoteric religious beliefs, obscure religious groups is about as American as apple pie. And that's one thing that makes the whole Steve Hassan cult scare so bizarre. Because people came to the United States, a lot of the settlers were religious minorities. They were people in obscure religious groups. And they came to the United States. And that's one thing here in the United States, we have a much bigger tolerance for religious fanaticism than other countries. If you go to France, you go to Britain, maybe even Canada. I don't know about Canada, but I think even in Canada, probably. If you want to be Amish, have no electricity, have no hot water, that's okay. But the second you have kids and say, I'm raising my kids without electricity, without running water, Children's Services is going to show up and take your kids away from you, and you might go to jail for child abuse. Not in the United States. Not in the United States. You're Amish. You're a conservative Mennonite. You're a Hutterite. You believe that electricity is wrong. Fine by you. In fact, we'll give you special schools. Special schools to go to. We'll let you have schools with a lot of electricity. We'll let you have your own little community. We will accommodate people with obscure and esoteric beliefs. We do. I mean, in the United States, we tolerate a lot of esoteric religious beliefs. At the end of the day, and that's why, one thing, we will never have a state religion in the United States. Jason Unruhe said on one of his videos that I advocate a state religion in the United States. I do not. I would never advocate a state religion in the United States. I personally am a Christian, but I would never want a state religion in the United States because it would never be tolerated. The USA has always been such a religiously diverse place. In our Constitution in the United States, it says that Congress, the first line of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging free practice thereof. Why does it say that? Why does it say that? Because at the time that the United States was coming together, there were 13 states, 13 colonies. 9 of those 13 colonies had a state religion. Maryland was Roman Catholic. Massachusetts was Puritan. Pennsylvania was Quaker. And the only way they could get all of those 13 colonies to be part of the same country was to make sure that there was not going to be a state religion. Because there was a fear on the part of some of the states that, Maryland was Roman Catholic. Well, almost all the Protestant fanatical groups in New England felt that Catholicism was pure evil. In England, they had just had the English Civil War, and it was basically a war waged not against Catholics, but against the King of England and the Church of England, because radical Protestants and Puritans thought they might be too sympathetic to the Catholics. Right? So, I mean, as far as the Puritans were concerned, Catholicism was Satan. Catholicism was the most evil thing in the world. Maryland was a Catholic state. So the only way they could form the 13 colonies was to make clear Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So the federal government could never establish a state religion, number one. And number two, no law restricting free exercise thereof, meaning there can't be a law that you can't practice your religion. Now, we all know the Supreme Court steps in and says, well, there's obviously limits on that, right? If your religion says human sacrifices, you don't get to commit murder. But in the United States, we tolerate a lot of things that other countries don't tolerate in terms of religious freedom. Snake handling. Snake handling. There are 2 states in the United States, I think West Virginia and Tennessee or Kentucky. There's 2 states in the United States where it is legal to engage in snake handling. Do you know what snake handling is? It is a Pentecostal religious practice where people hold poisonous snakes, not any snakes, poisonous snakes, while they're praying to test their loyalty to God. And they hold these poisonous snakes while they're praying. And you can watch videos of this on the internet. It's deranged. And there are children watching. Now, children can't do it. You have to be over 18 to do it, right? Because if you're under 18, you can't consent or whatever. It's getting late, Terry. It's getting late. But you can hold poisonous snakes. Yeah, most countries in the world, if you get together and you say, all right, I'm going to have my religious service. I'm going to have my religious service, and we're going to have poisonous snakes that can kill us, venomous snakes, and we're all going to hold them while we pray, and we're going to see if they bite us to test our loyalty to God. And keep in mind, a couple people die every year from this. A lot of people have died from snake handling. Most countries in the world, they're like, no, can't do that. Nope, that's not okay. Not okay. Especially if you're going to have children in the audience. Okay, yeah, obviously the kids aren't doing it, but you're having children in the audience? No, this ain't okay. You can't do that. Wrong. You're not allowed to do that. And, you're going to do that in violation of the law? Well, we're going to have the police show up and arrest you. But in the United States, snake handling. Hey, handle snakes. We have a huge tolerance for esoteric religious beliefs, for obscure religious beliefs in the United States. Huge tolerance for that. Huge. Huge. And Terry, I'll say something about that. Let me get to the point here. Huge tolerance for that. Writing it down. Huge tolerance for that. And, on some level, people need to just accept that that's going to be in existence. There's going to be religious fanatics in the United States. There's going to be people with beliefs that are non-conforming. And that's just going to be a reality. Right? And it's interesting because if you go to Nicaragua, there are a lot of fanatically religious groups that have a relationship with the socialist government. And, in North Korea, there are some Christian Korean sects that follow like prophets on the Korean Peninsula. The North Korean government allows them. They have a relationship with them. You go to Nicaragua, there's a lot of people in Nicaragua who are Moravians, which is kind of an obscure Christian religious group, pacifists. Nicaraguan government is okay with that. And they're always going to exist. The problem with such groups is if they start violating people's rights. They start sacrificing people. They start raising their children without electricity. That's where you start to have a problem. But largely, to answer your question, Shia, fanatically religious groups are always going to exist. And if we're going to have a society with freedom of conscience, people are going to be allowed to pursue them. And no, it's not okay to have people be kidnapped and deprogrammed like Steve Hassan was doing. And no, there's no magical voodoo that makes these people believe in this. I mean, there you go. Next question. Potential consequences of midterm election wave. I think the Democrats at this point are banking on the Supreme Court. At this point, they are trying to figure out how they can use the Supreme Court to shut down opposition to them. That's really what's going on. They're trying to get their nominee on the Supreme Court as fast as possible. They are at this point trying to remove Clarence Thomas from the Supreme Court. That's what my opening was about his wife. They're trying to discredit him and his wife, and they're trying to use the January 6th thing. the Democrats are going to try to use the Supreme Court to hold on to power. That's pretty clear. And yeah, we are heading for a deeper polarization of the country. Biden's administration is failing, and there is a very solid right-wing opposition. That right-wing opposition was centered around Trump. Trump is now gone. So there is not a charismatic figure who's at the center of the opposition to Biden. It's not going to be Ron DeSantis, I don't think. But we're facing deeper polarization. The country's going to get poorer. The right-wing opposition to Trump to Biden is no good. They're, because they're on the defensive, they're a little less authoritarian. But they still believe in free markets. They're still viciously anti-communist. They want to fight China rather than Russia, which is like, oh, that's great. Have a war with the other biggest country, right? Instead of having a war with the biggest country in terms of geography, we'll have a war with the biggest country in terms of population. So, the main thing that's needed is we need to spread our message. And we need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need optimistic, constructive socialism. The CPI needs to march ahead and start having our events and start raising awareness and giving people hope and giving people optimism and breaking them out of the doomerism, the dangerous doomerism that has infected U.S. society. Because, look, if the red states get in there, they might be able to block a lot of Biden's measures. Then Biden will just say, oh, see, the Republicans blocked me. It's not my fault. Everything I wanted to do was blocked by the Republicans. And, there you go. All right. Next question. Can you talk about communists in Donetsk and Lugansk? Well, I have been to Yalta in Crimea. I haven't been to Donetsk and Lugansk myself. However, I have met with people from Donetsk and Lugansk. When I was at the World Festival of Youth and Students, when I was at the Yalta Economic Forum, there were big delegations of young people from Donetsk and Lugansk. I also met with members of the Russian Communist Party. I actually was embedded in the Russian Communist Party's campaign in 2018 when I reported on the elections that were held in Russia. And communism is wildly popular there. And communist party, see, the thing is, you go to Donetsk and Lugansk. I haven't been there, but, I've talked to people from there. I've talked to the Communist Party. There is widespread Soviet nostalgia. There is widespread admiration for Stalin. There is widespread anti-fascism and the belief that their enemies, are Nazis and are trying to roll back and rewrite the history of World War II. There is widespread belief that life was better in Ukraine when communists were in power. There are worker cooperatives being formed. And the actual communist parties, and this is where it gets tricky, right? For example, Jeff Munson, who's an MMA fighter, a mixed martial arts fighter. He's a communist, and he went to Russia and joined the Communist Party. But he was so frustrated by the bureaucracy in the Russian Communist Party that now, he's involved in Russian politics, but he's a member of the United Russia Party. Well, even though he calls himself a communist, right? I am not a member of the Communist Party. I don't want to be a member of the Communist Party because I'm a journalist. I can't be a member of any party. But I'll tell you, I definitely wouldn't join the Communist Party because they've published crazy hit pieces and they're freaked out about the Center for Political Innovation and they think we're fascists. And the actual communist parties in Donetsk and Lugansk, the bona fide official, the breakaway, there was the Communist Party of Ukraine. And then when they separated, the communist parties, if you try to measure it based on that, you're going to get an inaccurate assessment. Because, again, right, the actual communist parties, the actual CPs, around the world, they are very big, bureaucratic, entrenched institutions. And in a lot of countries in the world, you have communists who are not in the Communist Party. Venezuela is a socialist country. The leader, Nicolas Maduro, is a Marxist-Leninist. They have a socialist constitution. They're they have worker cooperatives being set up. The government, it's got a base on these Bolivarian circles, Bolivarian revolutionary militias. And the Communist Party is part of the government, but it's not the only party. The main party is the United Socialist Party, which is a merger of many, many different communist groups. There's also the Fatherland for All Party, which is a Marxist-Leninist party. There's the Tupac Amaru Party, which is a party that emphasizes indigenous sovereignty. You go to Venezuela, the Venezuelan Communist Party exists, and that is the bona fide official Communist Party, but there are many other parties. And if you go to Nicaragua, there is the Communist Party of Nicaragua, but there's the Sandinista, the FSLN, right, which is the coalition, the Sandinista National Liberation Party, has a number of parties that are part of it. Some of them are Marxist parties, some of them are socialist parties, social democratic parties, and wherever you go in the world, it's become apparent now. In China, the Communist Party is the ruling party. In Vietnam, the Communist Party is the ruling party. In a lot of African countries, the Communist Party is the ruling party, right? In Angola, it's the MPLA, which was the Soviet-aligned party, the Liberation Front, or the popular, the People's Liberation Movement of Angola, the MPLA. They're the ruling party. In Mozambique, right, you have SWAPO, which is the Southwest African People's Organization, which is technically like the communist Marxist-Leninist party, right? In South Africa, the African National Congress, the Communist Party is like a faction within the African National Congress. And then you also have the Economic Freedom Fighters, which are like an explicitly Marxist-Leninist breakaway from the African National Congress. So in a lot of countries, yes, you do have the actual Communist Party. But a lot of places in the world, and not just in Donetsk and Lugansk, and not just in, Russia, not just in Venezuela, not just in Bolivia, not just in Nicaragua, the communist parties, but, they have a bureaucratic problem. They're stuck in the past. They're remnants of another time. And often the revolutionary energy will come from other anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and socialist groups. That's just a fact, right? And it took me a long time to realize that. A long time I had it in my mind that if we just get back to the pure Marxism-Leninism, no. Bolivarianism is definitely heavily influenced by Marxism-Leninism, but it's also heavily influenced by Christianity. It's also heavily influenced by the Ba'ath socialist movement. It's influenced by indigenous traditions and the indigenous sovereignty struggles. Bolivarianism is a unique formula for Venezuela and for South America. I haven't heard about that. It's a unique formula for Venezuela. And even in countries where the communists are in power. In China, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. Mao, when he was building the Chinese Communist Party, he was doing his own thing. He wasn't following the Comintern line. He had his own flavor that was unique for China. And then, unfortunately, a lot of the old school communist parties, especially in a place like East Ukraine and Donbass, where they were the ruling party for a long effing time, you will get parties that are very bureaucratic and entrenched, and they're incapable of adapting and adopting new tactics. And so just because the actual official Communist Party is not the one in charge of the government does not mean the country's not revolutionary, does not mean they're not socialist, does not mean that they're, not admirers of the Soviet tradition and anti-fascist and all of that. And that's what you need to remember, right? Because I've had a couple people come at me. I think this is what you were getting at, Terry. I don't know if this is necessarily where you were going with this. I had a couple people come at me and say, well, I read that the Communist Party in Donetsk was banned from the elections. Well, they weren't banned, I don't think. They exist. But they're only one faction. The amount of people in Donetsk that are, it's called the Donetsk People's Republic. They got statues of Lenin everywhere. Okay? There's widespread socialist feeling there. There's widespread anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist sentiment there. There's also a lot of social conservatism there, unfortunately. There's a lot of, right-wing ideas as well. But it's a mixed bag. But again, when you measure things by how is the official bona fide Marxist-Leninist CP Comintern party doing? Look, the Cuban Revolution was not made by the Cuban Communist Party. Fidel was not a member of the Cuban Communist Party. And his brother Raul was a member of the Communist Party, but he broke discipline by participating in the Cuban Revolution. The Cuban Communist Party didn't support, it was called the Popular Socialist Party. They didn't support the Cuban Revolution until the war had already been going on for like a year. And what is now called the Cuban Communist Party is actually a merger of the Popular Socialist Party, which was the official Communist Party of Cuba, and the Democratic Youth, and the July 26 movement, and it's a merger of different forces. That's a fact. Mao was very independent. Mao did not just do what Moscow told him to do. Bolivarianism is unique. Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Middle East. And, in a lot of countries in the world, and I've traveled to many countries in the world. I've been to Latin America. I've been to the Middle East. A lot of countries in the world, you look at the official Communist Party and you find the same thing. Old people who are very bitter. You find a lot of gray-haired people who are disappointed and frustrated that the Soviet Union fell and that the world is not the way they wanted. And they're very critical and angry at all the other anti-imperialist forces for not being classic Marxist-Leninists. Meanwhile, you tend to find the revolutionary energy outside of the old school communist parties. Look at the Communist Party USA. All right, that's the bona fide Communist Party. In the days of William Z. Foster and Gus Hall and Harry Haywood and Paul Robeson, the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, that was the party. That they were it. In the 1970s, they had a little bit of a revival. But if you look at the Communist Party USA right now, I mean, it sucks. I mean, I don't know how to put it any other way. It sucks. It's just, and the reason that they're so threatened by the Center for Political Innovation is because we're what they should be. Most people join the Communist Party thinking that it's something like what the Center for Political Innovation is. And they get in there and they realize, no, this is a bunch of liberals. This is a bunch of Democrats. Basically it's a bunch of old folks. And it's old folks whose parents were in the group before they were, and they kind of were born into it. And it's these old folks who've been in it for many years, their entire lives, and their parents were in it. And then there's a crew of like 20-year-olds who join because they think it's actually a communist party. And then they've hired 3 or 4, people that are in their early 30s or mid to late 30s that are like camp counselors, basically. And there's like 3 or 4 of them, and it's their job. They're getting paid. And their job is like keep the 20-year-olds in line until they quit and realize it's not a real party. And it's lame. Someone says it sounds like a cult. No, a cult would be functional. A cult would be recruiting people and expanding. A cult would be fanatical, full of fanaticism. Communist Party is the opposite of a cult. The Communist Party is dead. It's a dying organization. It has a huge amount of money. It has a huge office, lots of resources, lots of international connections. But it is a dying, decaying piece of Comintern Cold War wreckage. And in most parts of the world, that's what the communist parties are. Not in China, not in Vietnam, but in the United States and in a lot of countries in Latin America and a lot of Europe, the actual official Communist Party it's a decaying institution. Whereas you generally had the energy somewhere else, right? In Britain, you got the Workers' Party, George Galloway, Jyoti Brar. There's a lot of energy with those folks. But the actual Communist Party of Britain is kind of what I'm describing here. I'm trying to think of other examples, but, this is just kind of a problem, right? And that doesn't mean we shouldn't study Marxism-Leninism. We should. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't, try to have a relationship with these parties. We absolutely should. I want to talk to as many young people that are in the Communist Party because the Communist Party has the best history of any party in this country. And I study the history. William Z. Foster is so important. But the belief that, you're going to join one of these decaying, old, heavily bureaucratic parties, and you're going to go into it, and suddenly you're just going to rejuvenate it into being a revolutionary group, it's never going to happen. And that's why Haas, Haas, he did his thing, CPUSA 2036. I'm not Haas. Haas spoke at our conference. I know Haas. He's a great guy. I respect him on a number of levels. Don't agree with everything he says. He doesn't agree with everything I say. Respect him. But when he talked to me, I said, no, I think that, he talked to me about his, going into the Communist Party. I said, no, I've never encouraged people to go into the Communist Party. because I that's a lost cause. It's been a lost cause for a long time. People have been trying to do that for years. For years, they've been trying to go into the communist parties and make them revolutionary. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. They've been dealing with people trying to do that for years. They know exactly how to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm building a think tank right now. When I left the Workers' World Party, there were a lot of people that wanted me to start my own party. I didn't do that. I could have at that point. That was before I worked at RT, where they have the rule you can't be a member of a political party. I could have started my own party, but I didn't. I did not start my own party because if I did, it would have been a joke, right? If I had started the Workers' Revolutionary People's Liberation Party, that would have been a joke. If I'd started the Workers' World Party, parenthesis, Marxist, Leninist, it would have been a joke. Right? All these parties, the alphabet soup of these parties, none of these groups mean jack shit in the United States. None of them mean jack shit. None of them have a base among the population. None of them have a huge layer of support. And they all have a very delusional sense of themselves. At the end of the day, building a think tank is much more realistic. If you go to average working people and you say you're building a party, they're like, is it the Democrats or the Republicans? They're like, no, it's my own party. And they roll your eyes and they think you're a nut. We have a two-party system in the United States. Parties in the United States are for running candidates. But a think tank can put forward policy solutions and can educate people about socialism and can eventually lay the basis for something that could call itself a party. When the Bolsheviks were formed, it was all the greatest revolutionary fighters in one group. Lenin, Trotsky, well, not Trotsky, Stalin, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, they were all in one group. And it was this big formulation, and democratic centralism was a way to keep that group together. It was to keep this group of people that were very effective leaders of revolutionary labor struggles, and it was this group of like the big names, all the top organizers were in one group, and they were coordinating their actions in order to try and create socialism. No group in the United States is anything near that. Usually these groups, there's one very charismatic, I guess, or not so charismatic boomer at the center. There's a bunch of 20-year-olds who join and get kind of taken advantage of for a couple years and then they quit. And these groups, none of them have any mass base among the population. None of them have any influence. They don't really have any influence. They don't have any mass base, and they don't really have any aspiration to have one. And yet they call themselves a party. They're not a party. They're a group of people with a newspaper. They're a group of people who go to protests together and print books together. They're not a party. Something like a party will eventually come into existence. And my hope is that the teaching, the anti-imperialist teaching and the educational work, that's a good question. The anti-imperialist teaching and the educational work that the Center for Political Innovation is doing can eventually lay the basis for a party. I've made this analogy before, and I'll answer Gleb's question after this. But, in an orchestra, you've got a drummer, you got a pianist, you got a violinist, you got a trumpeter, you got a trombonist, you got a flutist, a flautist. You got different people doing different stuff, but they're all conducted by the conductor, right? They're all playing the same piece of music, but they're doing different things. That's what a genuine revolutionary party is like. That's not what we have in the United States. What we have right now is that we have a bunch of little cults, little sects. They all do one thing really well. Some of them are good at staging little protests. Some of them are good at going into labor unions and trying to organize the labor bureaucracy. Some of them are good at, making relationships with the Democratic Party and being kind of the, having an alliance with elected officials. Some of them are in academia. Some of them, they're all doing different stuff. They all do one thing really well. But then what they do is they go around to all the other groups and be like, yeah, well, we actually do something. Yeah, well, you just lead protests in the streets, but we have relationships with the Democrats. Yeah, well, you lead protests in the streets, but we print really revolutionary books. Yeah, well, you lead protests in the streets and you print books, but we have people working in the labor unions. And none of them are. It would be like having an orchestra where instead of everyone playing all their instruments together, the flutes are doing their own thing and then constantly going up to the drummers and saying, "You're an idiot for not being a flute." And the drummer is constantly going up to the pianist and saying, "You're a big phony because you're not, playing the piano. You're not, playing a drum." And it's all these groups can do one thing well. And so they've made it their political line that that's what you should do. And everyone else they all don't do anything. That's my favorite. Every communist group thinks that every other communist group, quote, doesn't do anything, which is ridiculous. No, they all do something. The question is, what are you doing? And is it helping or not? But they all think all the other groups don't do anything. And then that's how it is. A real revolutionary party would do all of the above. A real revolutionary party would have relationships with elected officials. A real revolutionary party would have a lot of influence in the labor movement. A real revolutionary party would print lots of books. A real revolutionary party would have people in academia. A real revolutionary party would have have influence and print newspapers and have educational institutions. A real revolutionary party would do everything that all these little tiny communist groups are doing, and then some. That's what a real revolutionary party would do. None of these groups are doing that. They all have like one thing they can kind of do well. And even if all of them merged into one group and did everything they did together, it would be such a small group of very, very isolated people that it really ultimately wouldn't matter that much. So my vision with the Center for Political Innovation is we are doing educational work. We're doing one thing, and we're not saying it's the only thing you should do. It's definitely not the only thing you should do. If you're doing labor union work, good for you. If you are in academia, good for you. I mean, I am not saying that what we do is the only thing that anyone should do. I'm definitely not saying that. But we are doing educational work, and we are putting forward policy solutions about socialism, and that's what we can do. And my hope is that the educational work that we do and the agitation with policy solutions that we do can eventually lay the basis for helping to bring into being something like the party we need. And take it or leave it. And if you don't want to work with us, that's fine. And if you want to be in another group and also work with us, that's also fine. We're not the one true party. We're not a party. We're a think tank. We have a job to do. Educate people about socialism, educate people about anti-imperialism, put forward policy solutions, demand a government of action that will fight for working families, get people to understand that Russia is not their enemy, China is not their enemy, Iran is not their enemy, the Pentagon and Wall Street are their enemy, that the people of the world and the people of the United States share a common destiny and imposing the imperialists. We're trying to get that message out there. And if you want to help, you want to come on board, great. Glad to have you. And you don't want to help, that's fine. But leave us alone. Leave us alone. We're not going to bother you. We're not going to go to your events and disrupt. We're not going to spread rumors all over the internet that you're Nazis. If you don't like what we do, leave us alone. Leave us alone and do your own thing. You fight your way, I fight mine. And I don't understand why the leftist groups are so opposed to doing that. Why do they have to mess with us? But there's a reason that they have to mess with us, because they know that we're showing them up. We're doing the job that they should be doing. If I was as incompetent at my job as Joe Sims, head of the CPUSA, is at his job, I would be really paranoid and threatened by anybody who could do a better job. The Communist Party sucks. The Revolutionary Communist Party sucks. The Socialist Workers Party sucks. The Workers' World Party sucks. The Party of Socialism and Liberation sucks. All these groups suck, okay? And we're trying with our meager resources. We're not even calling ourselves a party. We're just trying to do what needs to be done to educate people about socialism. And these groups are flipping out. They're losing their minds against us, threatening violence against us. They're just losing their minds because they know they suck. And the little that we have done with our little resources, our little membership, we have put on amazing conferences. We've done stuff that makes them look pretty weak and it's showing them up. So I guess that's just my commentary on that. Gleb's question here. All right. Why did Max Shachtman support the Vietnam War? Why did Max Shachtman support the Vietnam War? So for those of you who don't know, Max Shachtman was a member of the Communist Party. He eventually became a Trotskyist. He was a big leader of the American Trotskyist movement. And then in 1939, he broke away from the Socialist Workers' Party and the Trotskyists with the New York intellectuals. And he formed the Workers' Party, which eventually became the Independent Socialist League. And he was a mentor to a lot of the neocons, a lot of the people who became neocons, Irving Kristol, and other Trotskyites who became neocons. He was involved with the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program. He was an advisor to George Meany, the head of the AFL-CIO. Max Shachtman was a very important, leftist intellectual in the United States who became pro-imperialist. Who was he? I mean, why did he support the Vietnam War? Because Max Shachtman came to the conclusion that, quote-unquote, Stalinism was the enemy. That the Soviet Union was the enemy. And some of his followers, Irving Howe and others, came to the conclusion that as socialists, they were on the side of the West and NATO in the struggle against, quote-unquote, Stalinism. Right? He was an anti-communist. And even though he spoke in the name of Marxism and socialism, he was still an anti-communist. And because he was an anti-communist, he started thinking that fighting communists in places like Vietnam or Cuba, the Bay of Pigs invasion, was a good thing. And that's all there is to it. I mean, he was an anti-communist, and the war in Vietnam was a war to fight communists. And Trotskyism, in a lot of ways, is anti-communism. So there you go. Not much more to it than that. All right, folks. It's been a long time. But we're going to wrap things up here. Wild night. Upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.